the manager at the Pacific Beach Library. Thank you for joining me for our first day of our read aloud together of a brand new book. Today's book is A Room with a View by E.M. Forster. So I thought we'd start by talking a little bit about the book, but before then, because our group is now called Tea with a View, let's start with some tea to enjoy. Again, this is a book set in traditional England, although kind of branching out to different territories. So I thought we'd go with one of the more traditional teas. So we have a lovely Earl Grey tea. I do like this one a lot. It has a really nice aroma. This one, it's by Cafe Virtuoso, I think is the manufacturer of this tea. It is lovely. Or let's make it sound fancier. The purveyor of this tea. Hi, how you doing? Good to see you guys. I'm so happy to see so many of you have come back for the brand new book. Thank you and welcome back.
Members of the intel team are on the ground. Their reports will be reflected.
This is so good. Now, I'm not going to be able to eat during our reading because it just doesn't look good, but I'm going to share because I'm so proud of how this came out. I made some cookies for Dia de los Muertos, and so we have our little skeletal calavera cookie. So, there we go. Just thought I'd share a little cookie too. I'll have him later on with my tea. I think they'll pair nicely because that's a chocolate cookie with just a little bit of a coffee flavor, and I thought that the Earl Grey tea would just be, you know, just a nice basic black tea with a little extra hint of flavor in it, so thought it would go well. All right, so let's talk a little bit about our new book that we're going to read together. So I'm just going to give a little bit of background on it because I'm hoping that there might be some people who've never read the book before. If you wouldn't mind also at some point commenting to say whether this is your first time reading the book or if you've read it before or if you've seen one of the film adaptations. As I mentioned several times when this book was picked, I am absolutely in love with the 85 film adaptation by Merchant Ivory, starring Maggie Smith and Helena Bonham Carter and Daniel Day-Lewis. It's a wonderful, wonderful film. I'm going to try to see if I can figure out a way that we can incorporate that into our group somehow. But if not, just know that I am hearing their voices and singing the music in my head each time as we're getting ready. Yes, we have a brand new book to enjoy. So, just giving you a little bit of background. The book was published in 1908, which is so just get ready. Yes, we have a brand new book to enjoy. In the middle of the Edwardian era. The Edwardian era was actually pretty short. It only lasted from 1901 to 1910. It was preceded by the very long Victorian era. So King Edward I believe was 7th. Let's see. Yes, King Edward VII only reigned for the 9 years. He came on the throne, I believe, when he was 60 years old. And so there was a nice quote describing the Edwardian era. Samuel Hines described it as a leisurely time when women wore picture hats and did not vote, when the rich were not ashamed to live conspicuously, and the sun really never set on the British flag. So, perhaps a little over-idealized from the folks who did actually have quite a bit during that period. But what we're going to see in A Room with a View is a time when women are starting to branch out a little bit, and there's a bit more of a movement towards free thinking and just challenging how things are considered. And we're going to see that with several of the characters in this book. And so it's going to be lovely. I hope you enjoy it. I hope it is something that we will all enjoy together. We're going to start out with chapter 1, just one chapter today. And again, as always, for anyone who has not read with me before, I must start by saying I apologize in advance for any bad accents I will do. The story is set in England and in Italy. They will usually sound just like me, because this is the voice I know how to do. But occasionally I may try to branch out and do a couple little things, and if I mispronounce any words, I do apologize now. But also, as I mentioned, I've seen the film, so there's a couple words that I can hear in my head, like, I may try to imitate somebody unconsciously just because, like, I can hear how she says, Eliane or Lavish. Well, when we get to that, we'll see. All right, so, chapter 1 is called, the book is actually divided into 2 sections, so part 1 and part 2. So we'll begin with part 1, chapter 1, entitled The Bertolini. The Signora had no business to do it, said Miss Bartlett. No business at all. She promised us south rooms with a view close together, instead of which here are north rooms looking into a courtyard and a long way apart. Oh, Lucy! And a coffee besides, said Lucy, who had been further saddened by the Signora's unexpected accent. It might be London. She looked at the 2 rows of English people who were sitting at the table, at the row of white bottles of water and red bottles of wine that ran between the English people, at the portraits of the late Queen and the late Poet Laureate that hung behind the English people, heavily framed, at the notice of the English Church, Reverend Cuthbert Eager, M.A., Oxon. That was the only other decoration of the wall. Charlotte, don't you feel too that we might be in London? I can hardly believe that all kinds of other things are just outside. I suppose it is one's being so tired. This meat has surely been used for soup, said Miss Bartlett, laying down her fork. I want so to see the Arno, the rooms the Signora promised us in her... I want so to see the Arno. The rooms the Signora promised us in her letter would have looked over the Arno. The Signora had no business to do it at all. Oh, it is a shame. Any nook does for me, Miss Bartlett continued, but it does seem hard that you shouldn't have a view. Lucy felt that she had been selfish. Charlotte, you mustn't spoil me. Of course, you must look over the Arno, too. I meant that. The first vacant room at the front. You must have it, said Miss Bartlett, part of whose traveling expenses were paid by Lucy's mother, a piece of generosity to which she made many a tactful allusion. No, no, you must have it. I insist on it. Your mother would never forgive me, Lucy. She would never forgive me. The ladies' voices grew animated and, if the sad truth be owned, a little peevish. They were tired, and under the guise of unselfishness, they wrangled. Some of their neighbors interchanged glances, and one of the ill-bred people whom one does meet abroad, leant forward over the table and actually intruded into their argument. He said, I have a view. I have a view. Miss Bartlett was startled. Generally, at a pension, people looked them over for a day or two before speaking, and often did not find out what they would do till they had gone. She knew that the intruder was ill-bred, even before she glanced at him. He was an old man of heavy build, with a fair, shaven face and large eyes. There was something childish in those eyes, though it was not the childishness of senility. What exactly it was Miss Bartlett did not stop to consider, for her glance passed on to his clothes. These did not attract her. He was probably trying to become acquainted with them before they got into the swim, so she assumed a dazed expression when he spoke to her and then said, A view! Oh, a view! How delightful a view is! This is my son, said the old man. His name's George. He has a view, too. Ah, said Miss Bartlett, repressing Lucy, who was about to speak. What I mean, he continued, is that you can have our rooms and we'll have yours. We'll change. The better class of tourist was shocked at this and sympathized with the newcomers. Miss Bartlett, in reply, opened her mouth as little as possible and said, Thank you very much indeed. That is out of the question. Why? Said the old man, with both fists on the table. Because it is quite out of the question. Thank you. You see, we don't like to take, began Lucy. Her cousin again repressed her. But why? He persisted. Women like looking at a view, men don't. And he thumped with his fist like a naughty child and turned to his son, saying, George, persuade them. It's so obvious that they should have the rooms, said the son. There's nothing else to say. He did not look at the ladies as he spoke, but his voice was perplexed and sorrowful. Lucy too was perplexed, but she saw that they were in for what is known as quite a scene, and she had an odd feeling that whenever these ill-bred tourists spoke, the contest widened and deepened till it dealt not with rooms and views, but with, well, with something quite different, whose existence she had not realized before. Now the old man attacked Miss Bartlett almost violently. Why should she not change? What possible objection had she? They would clear out in half an hour. Miss Bartlett, though skilled in the delicacies of conversation, was powerless in the presence of brutality. It was impossible to snub anyone so gross. Her face reddened with displeasure. She looked around as much as to say, "Are you all like this?" And two little old ladies who were sitting further up the table, with shawls hanging over the back of their chairs, looked back, clearly indicating, "We are not. We are genteel." "Eat your dinner, dear," she said to Lucy, and began to toy again with the meat that she had once censured. Lucy mumbled that those people seemed very odd people opposite. "Eat your dinner, dear. This pension is a failure. Tomorrow we will make a change." Hardly had she announced this spell decision when she reversed it. The curtains at the end of the room parted and revealed a clergyman, stout but attractive, who hurried forward to take his place at the table, cheerfully apologizing for his lateness. Lucy, who had not yet acquired decency, at once rose to her feet, exclaiming, Oh! Why, it's Mr. Beebe! Oh, how perfectly lovely! Oh, Charlotte, we must stop now, however bad the rooms are. Oh! Miss Bartlett said, with more restraint, "How do you do, Mr. Beebe? I expect that you have forgotten us, Miss Bartlett and Miss Honeychurch, who were at Tunbridge Wells when you helped the vicar of St. Peter's that very cold Easter." The clergyman, who had the air of one on a holiday, did not remember the ladies quite as clearly as they
There's an
remembered him,
English-speaking soldier
but he
somewhere in
came
the
forward
region.
pleasantly enough
He's a
and
language
accepted the chair
specialist.
into which he was
His
beckoned
role is
by
to
Lucy.
translate information
"I
related to the West
am
into
so
Russian.
glad to see
If
you,"
we can
said
get
the
him to
girl,
join
who
us,
was in
we'll
a
have the
state of
upper hand in
spiritual
information
starvation,
warfare.
and would have been glad
Find
to
us
see
a
them
language
later if her
specialist
cousin
and
had
extract
permitted
him.
it. "Just fancy how small the world is. Summer Street, too, makes it so specially funny." "Miss Honeychurch lives in the parish of Summer Street," said Miss Bartlett, filling up the gap, "and she happened to tell me in the course of conversation that you have just accepted the living." "Yes, I heard from Mother so last week. She didn't know that I knew you at Tunbridge Wells, but I wrote back at once, and I said, Mr. Beebe is—" "Quite right," said the clergyman. "I move into the rectory at Summer Street next June. I am lucky to be appointed to such a charming neighborhood." "Oh, how glad I am! The name of our house is Windy Corner." Mr. Beebe bowed. "There is Mother and me generally, and my brother, though it's not often that we get him to the church is rather far off, I mean. Lucy, dearest, let Mr. Beebe eat his dinner." "I am eating it, thank you, and enjoying it." He preferred to talk to Lucy, whose playing he remembered, rather than to Miss Bartlett, who probably remembered his sermons. He asked the girl whether she knew Florence well, and was informed at some length that she had never been there before. It is delightful to advise a newcomer, and he was first in the field. "Don't neglect the country road," his advice concluded. "The first fine afternoon, drive up to Fiesole, and round by Settignano, or something of that sort." "No," cried a voice from the top of the table. "Mr. Beebe, you are wrong. The first fine afternoon your ladies must go to Prato." "That lady looks so clever," whispered Miss Bartlett to her cousin. "We are in luck." And indeed, a perfect torrent of information burst on them. People told them what to see, when to see it, how to stop the electric trams, how to get rid of the beggars, how much to give for a vellum blotter, how much the place would grow upon them. The Pensione Bertolini had decided, almost enthusiastically, that they would do. Whichever way they looked, kind ladies smiled and shouted at them, and above all rose the voice of the clever lady crying, "Prato! They must go to Prato! That place is too sweet and squalid for words. I love it. I revel in shaking off the trammels of respectability, as you know." The young man named George glanced at the clever lady, and then returned musing to his plate. Obviously, he and his father did not do. Lucy, in the midst of her success, found time to wish they did. It gave her no extra pleasure that anyone should be left in the cold, and when she rose to go, she turned back and gave the two outsiders a nervous little bow. The father did not see it. The son acknowledged it, not by another bow, but by raising his eyebrows and smiling.
This is
He
important.
seemed to be smiling across something.
Sniper at large in the Afghan
She hastened
wilderness.
after her cousin, who had already disappeared through the curtains which smote one in the face and seemed heavy with more than thought. Behind them stood the unreliable Senora, bowing good evening to her guests, and supported by Annery, her little boy, and Victoria, her daughter. It made a curious little scene, this attempt of the Cockney to convey the grace and geniality of the South. And even more curious was the drawing room, which attempted to rival the solid comfort of a Bloomsbury boarding house. Was this really Italy? Miss Bartlett was already seated on a tightly stuffed armchair, which had the color and the contours of a tomato. She was talking to Mr. Bede, and as she spoke, her long, narrow head drove backwards and forwards, slowly, regularly, as though she were demolishing some invisible obstacle. "We are most grateful to you," she was saying. "The first evening means so much. When you arrived, we were in for a peculiarly mauvais quart d'heure." Bad quarter of an hour. He expressed his regret. "Do you by any chance know the name of an old man who sat opposite us at dinner?" "Emerson." "Is he a friend of yours?" "We are friendly as one is in pensions." "Then I will say no more." He pressed her very slightly, and she said more. "I am, as it were," she concluded, "the chaperone of my young cousin, Lucy, and it would be a serious thing if I put her under an obligation to people of whom we know nothing." His manner was somewhat unfortunate. I hope I acted for the best. "You acted very naturally," said he. He seemed thoughtful, and after a few moments added, "All the same, I don't think much harm would have come of accepting." "No harm, of course, but we could not be under an obligation." "He is rather a peculiar man." Again he hesitated, and then said gently, "I think he would not take advantage of your acceptance, nor expect you to show him gratitude. He has the merit, if it is one, of saying exactly what he means. He has rooms he does not value, and he thinks you would value them. He no more thought of putting you under an obligation than he thought of being polite. It is so difficult, at least I find it difficult, to understand people who speak the truth." Lucy was pleased and said, "I was hoping that he was nice. I do so always hope that people will be nice." "I think he is. Nice and tiresome." Sorry, this is rough again. "I think he is. Nice and tiresome. I differ from him on almost every point of any importance, and so I expect, I may say I hope, you will defer. But his is a type one disagrees with rather than deplores. When he first came here, he not unnaturally put people's backs up. He has no tact and no manners. I don't mean by that he has bad manners, and he will not keep his opinions to himself. We nearly complained about him to our depressing Senora, but I'm glad to say we thought better of it." "Am I to conclude," said Miss Bartlett, "that he is a socialist?" Mr. Bede accepted the convenient word, not without a slight twitch of the lips. "And presumably he has brought up his son to be a socialist too?" "I hardly know George, for he hasn't learned to talk yet. He seems a nice creature, and I think he has brains. Of course he has all his father's mannerisms, and it is quite possible that he, too, may be a socialist." "Oh, you relieve me," said Miss Bartlett. "So you think I ought to have accepted their offer? You feel I have been narrow-minded and suspicious?" "Not at all," he answered. "I never suggested that." "But ought I not to apologize, at all events, for my apparent rudeness?" He replied with some imitation that it would be quite unnecessary, and got up from his seat to go to the smoking room. "Was I a bore?" asked Miss Bartlett as soon as he disappeared. "Why didn't you talk, Lucy? He prefers young people, I'm sure. I do hope I haven't monopolized him. I hoped you would have him all the evening, as well as all dinner time." "He is nice," exclaimed Lucy, Just what I remember. He seems to see good in everyone. No one would take him for a clergyman. My dear Lucia. Well, you know what I mean. And you know how clergymen generally laugh. Mr. Beebe laughs just like an ordinary man. Funny thing, how you do remind me of your mother. I wonder if she will approve of Mr. Beebe. I'm sure she will, and so will Freddie. I think everyone at Windy Corner will approve. It is the fashionable world. I am used to Tunbridge Wells, where we are all hopelessly behind the times. Yes, said Lucy despondently. There was a haze of disapproval in the air, but whether the disapproval was of herself, or of Mr. Beebe, or of the fashionable world at Windy Corner, or of the narrow world at Tunbridge Wells, she could not determine. She tried to locate it, but as usual, she blundered. Miss Bartlett sedulously denied disapproving of anyone, and added, I am afraid you are finding me a very depressing companion. And the girl again thought, I must have been selfish or unkind. I must be more careful. It is so dreadful for Charlotte. Fortunately, one of the little old ladies, who for some time had been smiling very benignly, now approached and asked if she might be allowed to sit where Mr. Beebe had sat. Permission granted, she began to chatter gently about Italy, the plunge it had been to come there, the gratifying success of the plunge, the improvement in her sister's health, the necessity of closing the bedroom windows at night, and of thoroughly emptying the water bottles in the morning. She handled her subjects agreeably, and they were perhaps more worthy of attention than the high discourse upon Guelphs and Ghibellines, which was proceeding tempestuously at the other end of the room. It was a real catastrophe, not a mere episode, that evening of hers at Venice, when she had found in her bedroom something that is one worse than a flea, though one better than something else. But here you are as safe as in England. Signora Bertolini is so English. Yet our rooms smell, said poor Lucy. We dread going to bed. Ah, then you look into the court, she sighed. If only Mr. Emerson was more tactful. We were so sorry for you at dinner. I think he was meaning to be kind. Undoubtedly he was, said Miss Bartlett. Mr. Beebe has just been scolding me for my suspicious nature. Of course I was holding back on my cousin's account. Of course, said the little old lady, and they murmured that one could not be too careful with a young girl. Lucy tried to look demure, but could not help feeling a great fool. No one was careful with her at home, or, at all events, she had not noticed it. About old Mr. Emerson, I hardly know. No, he is not tactful. Yet, have you ever noticed that there are people who do things which are most indelicate, and yet at the same time, beautiful? Beautiful, said Miss Bartlett, puzzled at the word. Are not beauty and delicacy the same? So one would have thought, said the other helplessly, but things are so difficult, I sometimes think. She proceeded no further into things, for Mr. Beebe reappeared, looking extremely pleasant. Miss Bartlett, he cried, it's all right about the rooms? I'm so glad. Mr. Emerson was talking about it in the smoking room, and knowing what I did, I encouraged him to make the offer again. He has let me come and ask you. He would be so pleased. Oh, Charlotte, cried Mrs. poor cousin, we must have the rooms now. The old man is just as nice and kind as he can be. Miss Bartlett was silent. I fear, said Mr. Beebe after a pause, that I have been officious. I must apologize for my interference. Gravely displeased, he turned to go. Not till then did Miss Bartlett reply, My own wishes, dearest Lucy, are unimportant in comparison with yours. It would be hard indeed if I stopped you doing as you liked in Florence, when I am only here through your kindness. If you wish me to turn these gentlemen out of their rooms, I will do it. Would you then, Mr. Beebe, kindly tell Mr. Emerson that I accept his kind offer, and then conduct him to me, in order that I may thank him personally? She raised her voice as she spoke, It was heard all over the drawing room and silenced the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. The clergyman, inwardly cursing the female sex, bowed and departed with her message. Remember, Lucy, I alone am implicated in this. I do not wish the acceptance to come from you. Grant me that, at all events. Mr. Beebe was back, saying rather nervously, Mr. Emerson is engaged, but here is his son instead. The young man gazed down on the three ladies, who felt seated on the floor. So low were their chairs. My father, he said, is in his bath, so you cannot thank him personally. But any message given by you to me will be given by me to him as soon as he comes out.
At Mother Base.
Miss Bartlett was unequal to the bath. All her barbed civilities came forth wrong end first. Young Mr. Emerson scored a notable triumph to the delight of Mr. Beebe and to the secret delight of Lucy.
Enemy presence detected.
Poor young man, said Miss Bartlett as soon as he had gone. How angry he is with his father about the rooms. It is all he can do to keep the light. In half an hour or so your rooms will be ready, said Mr. Beebe. Then looking rather thoughtfully at the two cousins, he retired to his own rooms to write up his philosophic diary. Oh dear, breathed the little old lady, and shuddered as if all the winds of heaven had entered the apartment. Gentlemen sometimes do not realize... Her voice faded away, but Miss Bartlett seemed to understand, and a conversation developed in which gentlemen who did not thoroughly realize played a principal part. Lucy, not realizing either, was reduced to literature. Taking up Baedeker's Handbook to Northern Italy, she committed to memory the most important dates in Florentine history, for she was determined to enjoy herself on the morrow. Thus the half hour crept profitably away, and at last Miss Bartlett rose with a sigh and said, I think one must venture now. No, Lucy, do not stir. I will superintend the move. How you do everything, said Lucy. Naturally, dear, it is my affair. But I would like to help you. No, dear. Charlotte's energy and her unselfishness. She had been thus all her life, but really on this Italian tour she was surpassing herself. So Lucy felt, or strove to feel. And yet, there was a rebellious spirit in her which wondered whether the acceptance might not have been less delicate and more beautiful. At all events, she entered her own room without any feeling of joy. I want to explain, said Miss Bartlett, why it is that I have taken the largest room. Naturally, of course, I should have given it to you, but I happen to know that it belongs to the young man, and I was sure your mother would not like it. Lucy was bewildered. If you are to accept a favor, it is more suitable you should be under an obligation to his father than to him. I am a woman of the world in my small way, and I know where things lead to. However, Mr. Beebe is a guarantee of the sort that they will not presume on this. Mother wouldn't mind, I'm sure, said Lucy, but again had the sense of larger and unsuspected issues. Miss Bartlett only sighed, and enveloped her in a protecting embrace as she wished her good night. It gave Lucy the sensation of a fog, and when she reached her own room, she opened the door and breathed the clean night air, thinking of the kind old man who had enabled her to see the lights dancing in the Arno, and the cypresses of San Miniato, and the foothills of the Apennines, black against the rising moon. Miss Bartlett in her room fastened the window shutters and locked the door, and then made a tour of the apartment to see where the cupboards led, and whether there were any oubliettes or secret entrances. It was then that she saw, pinned up over the washstand, a sheet of paper on which was scrawled an enormous note of interrogation. Nothing more. What does it mean? She thought, and she examined it carefully by the light of a candle. Meaningless at first, it gradually became menacing, obnoxious, portentous with evil. She was seized with an impulse to destroy it, but fortunately remembered that she had no right to do so, since it must be the property of young Mr. Emerson. So she unpinned it carefully and put it between 2 sheets of blotting paper to keep it clean for him. Then she completed her inspection of the room, sighed heavily according to her habit, and went to bed. And that concludes our first chapter of A Room with a View. As we're already getting to know our characters, we've met Lucy Honeychurch, the young lady who is traveling with her older cousin, Charlotte Bartlett. We know Charlotte is a relatively poor relation who is serving as the chaperone for Lucy, and they have met several people, the Reverend Mr. Beebe, young and elder Mr. Emerson, as well as the 2 sisters, who I think we'll learn their names in the next chapter, as well as a very loud, bold woman who sincerely recommends they visit the Procto. And I believe we'll see her more next chapter also. So thank you all for joining me today for this first day of our read-along together of A Room with a View. I hope that you will enjoy the rest of it along with me, and thank you very much. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Ciao. Since we're in Italy, right? Ciao. Hi friends, welcome back. I'm Christina, the manager at the Pacific Beach Library. Thank you for joining me for the second day of our read-along together of A Room with a View by E.M. Forster. Let's see. I thought we would start out with a very special tea today. It is, for anyone who's watching this after the fact and maybe didn't look at the date that it first appeared, this is airing on November the 3rd, which, as we know, is Election Day here in the United States. And so, in honor of the excitingness that is Election Day, I decided to make a special red, white, and blue tea. How would I do this? Well, I got by combining a red rooibos tea bag, a black tea that is blueberry flavored, and a white tea, which I added on a few extra colors because the only white tea I had on hand was the white, orange, peach, and ginger tea. So we're getting a red, white, and blue tea with a little bit of orange, peach, and ginger colors also. So let's go ahead and give this a try. I am actually very curious as to whether this will be good. I hope it'll be good. One always hopes for good things, but as they say, democracy is a messy process. It is not an easy form of government. If it was, well, where did I hear that quite recently? Something about the easiest form of government is, where you're told exactly what to do. But democracy is messy, and you never know exactly what's going to happen, and that's what makes it beautiful. So let's hope for this tea. It has a really good smell, but I can smell the blueberry. That's actually really good. Yeah, the blueberry's nice in there. The rooibos, you can kind of taste it. The white tea, I'm not exactly sure if that's getting overpowered by the other one, but it's still very good. I was worried that the flavors would fight with each other too much, but it's actually very good. So, yay! Let's hear for democracy and red, white, and blue tea. And if you haven't already gone out, by the way, and voted, please go ahead and vote. All of our San Diego public libraries are serving as mail ballot drop-off locations all the way till 8 p.m. I'll be here at the PD library till 8 p.m. tonight, along with the workers and the registrar of voters, so that your vote can be received. So thank you very much for everyone who has already gone out and voted. And again, if you have not yet, please go and do so. The polls are open tonight. So, now that we've had our red, white, and blue tea, let's talk a little bit about what we read yesterday. And let's see. So we started A Room with a View. And as you may have noticed, our chapters are a lot shorter in this book than the other. I did a little, it's so funny, I try to be organized here. I made a little chart for myself of about exactly how many pages are in each chapter and about what day I think we're going to read it. And according to my schedule right now, I think we're going to finish on Tuesday, December 1st. But I'm thinking maybe we can squeeze a few more in and combine a few days with a few extra chapters so that we can finish right before Thanksgiving. Because I think that might be kind of fun also. So we'll see how the length of these readings feel to us. If they're feeling too short, then I might combine a few other ones so we can finish right before the end of before Thanksgiving break. But we'll see what happens. Let's start out with chapter 1 discussion. So in the Bertolini, it started out basically with 2 characters talking with each other, maybe arguing a little bit. Ooh, sorry, I just saw that somebody's having coffee and milk with leftover Halloween candies. I love Halloween candies, that sounds so good. Good tea choice, Pam. Very good. Let's see. By tea, I mean tea time. Tea time can include coffee, of course. Let's see. So it started in the Bertolini, which is And again, I've already told you guys I will probably mispronounce many things, and I think one of them is I had thought that when I had seen the film, which again is near and dear to me, but it's been many years, I thought they called it the Pensione Bertolini. So when they are just referring to it as, by not saying the whole name, should it be the Pensione, even though it's spelled like pension? Pension? I don't even know. We'll see how it works out today. I think I was calling it the pension yesterday, but it felt so much like a retirement fund. I might go for pension, and I don't know if that's correct, but we'll go for it. But either way, it starts out at the Bertolini. And basically, Charlotte Bartlett is the older cousin and chaperone for Lucy Honeychurch. And the two of them are two English ladies who have just arrived in Florence in Italy. And they're talking about their disappointment that their rooms do not have a view. They were promised rooms with a view, and in fact, they're looking out over a courtyard, so they're both a little griping about that. They're also picking on the dinner, that Charlotte is saying the meat doesn't look very good. And then also, Lucy is saying she's even more disappointed too that it just, even though they've gone all the way to Italy, that it feels like they're just in England, because they look around the dining room table and the proprietress is an English lady, that the other guests are all English. The picture on the wall is Queen Victoria, and so it's like, it just, even though they've gone across the pond and gone to Italy, it feels like they're just in England, and just like, and not even a view. It's like the last straw. Just they're both a little unhappy, frankly. And as they're arguing with each other gently, politely, genteelly, let's say, we'll get to use that word genteel a lot, I think, in this book. One of the gentlemen who's at the table, Mr. Emerson, says, I've got a room with a view. My son has a room with a view. We don't value the view. Why don't we just take rooms? I mean, clearly, I think we enjoy it. And although this is an incredibly kind and generous offer, it is not a polite offer. He should, according to the rules of society, he should not have acknowledged that he had overheard the two women griping with each other. He should also not be, as a man, and his son also, he should occupy these rooms. Is it appropriate that they should be almost sharing a bedroom in that way, of like exchanging bedrooms? And so, it's a very restrictive society, and so the fact that he would just sort of speak up and say, common sense says that you want the rooms that we don't value, why don't we trade, is not common sense of the time. And so, it's like a social faux pas. So Miss Bartlett is like, absolutely, we cannot have any obligation to men. They might want something from us in return later on. And so, it's an interesting little glimpse into the kind of ideas that are binding them, even when they're out there, and this generous offer comes to them.
We've established a sick bay on the new medical platform.
They continue the conversation later on after dinner, and there's a gentleman who's the Reverend Mr. Beebe, and Mr. Beebe is somebody who Lucy Honeychurch had briefly met before, and Mr. Beebe, it turns out, is about to become the priest in the area where she lives, where her home of Windy Corner, I think it was called. And so Mr. Beebe intervenes, and he says, that man, Mr. Emerson, it was rather impolite of him to make that offer, but I actually don't think he's trying to ask you for anything and put you into any kind of debt or obligation. He's kind of a free thinker. He's a socialist. Oh my goodness. But he has a good heart. And I think he was just trying to offer you something that he thought would make you happy, that he genuinely does not value it for himself. And so, on Mr. Beebe's recommendation, they sort of come around to the thing of like, well, maybe we can do this. Now, what's also very interesting too is that there's a woman who we don't know her name yet in this chapter, but she's one of the two elderly sisters that was in the drawing room also, or sorry, the dinner room. And so she had overheard the conversations, and she says this thing that she says about old Mr. Emerson. No, he is not tactful, yet have you ever noticed that there are people who do things which are most indelicate and yet at the same time beautiful? And I think that's something that we want to keep in mind with this story, is that Mr. Emerson, Miss Bartlett is, she epitomizes like this idea of the rules of society, and Mr. Emerson is this idea of the rules are not necessarily there to be followed. You do what your heart says. And it's that sense that, he's following his heart and he's doing what is beautiful. And so it's an interesting idea that Charlotte is having a hard time fathoming, because in Miss Bartlett's world, to not follow the rules is just wrong. And so how could it be something beautiful? Again, as we spoke about, this is an interesting time where things were just, societal mores were opening up and changing, and it's we get to see it here in the story, in just this little vignette about the room and the view. So basically, Mr. Beebe, he goes out to the smoking room with the gentleman, and he comes back in and he says, Mr. Emerson said again that he'd be happy to do it, and so let's, if you're okay with it, let's make the trade. And Miss Bartlett is like, well, it seems now like you're kind of judging me, that you're thinking that I shouldn't have refused him the first time, so very well, I'll make the sacrifice. It will be on my head that we make this trade. So Charlotte is again establishing herself as the martyr, and being a little bit officious about everything, but it's who she is. And so they agreed that they will change the rooms. And so and Charlotte again, and Lucy's like, well, let me help pack up, and Charlotte's like, no, I will do it, I'll do everything. So again, Charlotte is the martyr. And again, she does have the role of the chaperone. She is a poor cousin. She is being paid by the Honeychurch family to, like they've paid for some of her tickets and things like that. So she may have that obligation there also, but it's also part of it, her nature. And so, yeah, it's great. So they end up trading the rooms, and Charlotte makes a point of saying how she has kept the larger of the two rooms, which normally her place would not be to keep the larger of the two rooms, but she's doing it because she knows that the young man, George Emerson, the son, had inhabited that room. And in fact, when she goes there, she sees a very odd thing. She sees a paper over the washstand, so like over the mirror where, after he like shaved or whatever, where she sees a large question mark. Nothing else, just a large question mark. That would be the thing he would want to look at each day. And she questions what it means, and she examines it. At first, it looks menacing or obnoxious, perhaps even pretentious of evil, and she wants to destroy it. But then she can't, because she realizes it doesn't belong to her, it's Mr. Emerson's, and so she sets it aside for him. But again, it's that idea of the things that we don't understand must be evil, and the things that we don't understand must be scary and somehow threatening to her, and that she has to stop it. So this is the setting we have for Chapter 1. Chapter 2 is entitled In Santa Croce with no Baedeker. Again, for anyone who isn't familiar, a Baedeker is a series. Baedeker was a publisher of travel guides. So in the modern era, it'd be like saying visiting San Diego with no Fodors or Fromers or Lonely Planet guide. So Chapter 2 is entitled In Santa Croce with no Baedeker. It was pleasant to wake up in Florence, to open the eyes upon a bright bare room with a floor of red tiles which look clean, though they are not, with a painted ceiling whereon pink griffins and blue amorini sport in a forest of yellow violins and bassoons. It was pleasant, too, to fling wide the windows, pinching the fingers in unfamiliar fastenings, to lean out into sunshine with beautiful hills and trees and marble churches opposite, and close below the Arno, gurgling against the embankment of the road. Over the river, men were at work with spades and sieves on the sandy foreshore, and on the river was a boat, also diligently employed for some mysterious end. An electric tram came rushing underneath the window. No one was inside it, except one tourist, but its platforms were overflowing with Italians who preferred to stand. Children tried to hang on behind, and the conductor, with no malice, spat in their faces to make them let go. Then soldiers appeared, good-looking, undersized men, wearing each a knapsack covered with mangy fur and a greatcoat which had been cut for some larger soldier. Beside them walked officers looking foolish and fierce, and before them went little boys turning somersaults in time with the band. The tram car became entangled in their ranks and moved on painfully, like a caterpillar in a swarm of ants. One of the little boys fell down, and some white bullocks came out of an archway. Indeed, if it had not been for the good advice of an old man who was selling buttonhooks, the road might never have got clear. Over such trivialities as these, many a valuable hour may slip away, and the traveler who has gone to Italy to study the tactile values of Giotto or the corruption of the papacy may return remembering nothing but the blue sky and the men and the women who live under it. So it was as well that Miss Bartlett should tap and come in, and having commented on Lucy's leaving the door unlocked and on her leaning out of the window before she was fully dressed, should urge her to hasten herself, for the best of the day would be gone. By the time Lucy was ready, her cousin had done her breakfast and was listening to the clever lady among the crumbs. A conversation then ensued on not unfamiliar lines. Miss Bartlett was, after all, a wee bit tired, and thought they had better spend the morning settling in, unless Lucy would at all like to go out. Lucy would rather like to go out, as it was her first day in Florence, but of course she could go alone. Miss Bartlett could not allow this. Of course she would accompany Lucy everywhere. Oh, certainly not. Lucy would stop with her cousin. Oh no, that would never do. Oh yes. At this point, the clever lady broke in. If it is Mrs. Grundy who is troubling you, I do assure you that you can neglect the good person. Being English, Miss Honeychurch will be perfectly safe. Italians understand. A dear friend of mine, Contessa Baroncelli, has 2 daughters, and when she cannot send a maid to school with them, she lets them go in sailor hats instead. Everyone takes them for English, you see, especially if their hair is strained tightly behind. Miss Bartlett was unconcerned by the safety of Contessa Baroncelli's daughters. She was determined to take Lucy herself, her head not being so very bad.
Deploying.
The clever lady then said that she was going to spend a long morning in Santa Croce, and if Lucy would come too, she would be delighted. I will take you by a dear, dirty back way, Miss Honeychurch, and if you bring me luck, we shall have an adventure. Lucy said that this was most kind, and at once opened the Baedeker to see where Santa Croce was. Tut, tut, Miss Lucy, I hope we shall soon emancipate you from Baedeker. He does but touch the surface of things. As to the true Italy, he does not even dream of it. The true Italy is only to be found by patient observation. This sounded very interesting, and Lucy hurried over her breakfast and started with her new friend in high spirits. Italy was coming at last. The coffee signora and her works had vanished like a bad dream. Miss Lavish, for that was the clever lady's name, turned to the right along the sunny Longard. How delightfully warm! But a wind down the side streets cut like a knife, didn't it? Ponte alle Grazie, particularly interesting, mentioned by Dante. San Miniato, beautiful as well as interesting. The crucifix that kissed a murderer. Miss Honeychurch would remember the story. The men on the river were fishing. Untrue, but then... Then Miss Lavish darted under the archway of the white bullocks, and she stopped, and she cried, "A smell! A true Florentine smell! Every city, let me teach you, has its own smell." "Is it a very nice smell?" said Lucy, who had inherited from her mother a distaste to dirt. "One doesn't come to Italy for niceness," was the retort. "One comes for life. Buongiorno, buongiorno," bowing right and left. Look at that adorable wine cart, how the driver stares at us, dear simple soul. So Miss Lavish proceeded through the streets of the city of Florence, short, fidgety, and playful as a kitten, though without a kitten's grace. It was a treat for the girl to be with anyone so clever and so cheerful, and a blue military cloak, such as an Italian officer wears, only increased the sense of festivity. "Buongiorno! Take the word of an old woman, Miss Lucy. You will never repent of a little civility to your inferiors. That is the true democracy, though I am a real radical as well. There, now you're shocked."
That's communications equipment used by the outpost CP.
"Indeed, I'm not," exclaimed Lucy. "We are radicals too, out and out. My father always voted for Mr. Gladstone until he was so dreadful about Ireland." I see. And now you have gone over to the enemy. Oh, please. If my father was alive, I am sure he would vote radical again, now that Ireland is all right. And as it is, The glass over our front door was broken last election, and Freddie is sure it was the Tories. But Mother says nonsense. A tramp. Shameful. A manufacturing district, I suppose? No, in the Surrey Hills, about 5 miles from Dorking, looking over the wheel. Miss Lavish seemed interested and slackened her trot. What a delightful park! I know it so well. It is full of the very nicest people. Do you know Sir Henry Otway? A radical, if ever there was one. If ever there was. Very well indeed. And old Mrs. Butterworth, the philanthropist? Why, she rents a field of us. How funny. Miss Lavish looked at the narrow ribbon of sky and murmured, "Oh, you have property in Surrey." "Hardly any," said Lucy, fearful of being thought a snob. "Only 30 acres. Just the garden, all downhill, and some fields." Miss Lavish was not disgusted, and said it was just the size for her aunt's Suffolk estate. Italy receded. They tried to remember the last name of Lady Louisa someone, who had taken a house near Summer Street the other year, but she had not liked it, which was odd of her. And just as Miss Lavish had got the name, she broke off and exclaimed, Bless us and save us! We've lost the way." Certainly they had seemed a long time in reaching Santa Croce, the tower of which had been plainly visible from the landing window. But Miss Lavish had said so much about knowing her Florence by heart that Lucy had followed her with no misgivings. Lost, my dear Miss Lucy, during our political diatribes, we have taken a wrong turning. How those horrid conservatives would jeer at us. What are we to do? 2 lone females in an unknown town. Now, this is what I call an adventure. Lucy, who wanted to see Santa Croce, suggested as a possible solution that they should ask the way there. "Oh, but that is the word of a craven. And no, you are not to look at your Baedeker. Give it to me. I shan't let you carry it. We will simply drift." Accordingly, they drifted through a series of those gray-brown streets, neither commodious nor picturesque, in which the eastern quarter of the city abounds. Lucy soon lost interest in the discontent of Lady Louisa, and became discontented herself. For one ravishing moment Italy appeared. She stood in the square of the Annunziata, and saw in the living terracotta those divine babies whom no cheap reproductions can ever stale. There they stood, with their shining limbs bursting from the garments of charity, and their strong white arms extended against the surface of heaven. Lucy thought she had never seen anything more beautiful, but Miss Lavish, with a shriek of dismay, dragged her forward, declaring that they were out of their path now by at least a mile. The hour at which the continental breakfast begins, or rather ceases, to tell, and the ladies bought some hot chestnut paste out of a little shop, because it looked so typical. It tasted partly of the paper in which it was wrapped, partly of hair oil, partly of the great unknown. But it gave them strength to drift into another piazza, large and dusty, on the farther side of which rose a black and white facade of surpassing ugliness. Miss Lavish spoke to it dramatically. It was Santa Croce. The adventure was over. "Stop a minute. Let those 2 people go on, or I shall have to speak to them. I do detest conventional intercourse. Nasty. They are going to the church, too. Oh, the Britisher abroad. We sat opposite them at dinner last night. They have given us their rooms. They were so very kind." "Look at their figures," laughed Miss Lavish. "They walk through my Italy like a pair of cows. It's very naughty of me, but I would like to set an examination paper at Dover and turn back every tourist who couldn't pass it." "What would you ask us?" Miss Lavish laid her hand pleasantly on Lucy's arm, as if to suggest that she, at all events, would get full marks. In this exalted mood, they reached the steps of the great church, and were about to enter it when Miss Lavish stopped, squeaked, flung up her arms, and cried, "There goes my local color boss. I must have a word with him. and in a moment she was away over the piazza, her military cloak flapping in the wind, nor did she slacken until she caught up to an old man with white whiskers and nipped him playfully upon the arm.
Get down. The enemy sniper. Stay low and crawl along the ground. That should enable you to
Lucy waited for nearly 10 minutes. Then she began to get tired. The beggars worried her, the dust blew in her eyes, and she remembered that a young girl ought not to loiter in public places. She descended slowly into the piazza with the intention of rejoining Miss Lavish, who was really almost too original. But at that moment Miss Lavish and her local son-in-law moved also and disappeared down a side street, both gesticulating largely. Tears of indignation came into Lucy's eyes, partly because Miss Lavish had jilted her, partly because she had taken her bait at her. How could she find her way home? How could she find her way about in Santa Croce? Her first morning was ruined, and she might never be in Florence again. A few minutes ago she had been all heightened, talking as a woman of culture and half persuading herself that she was full of originality. Now she entered the church, depressed and humiliated, not even able to remember whether it was built by the Franciscans or the Dominicans. Of course, it must be a wonderful building, but how like a barn, and how very cold. Of course, it contained frescoes by Giotto, in the presence of whose tactile values she was capable of feeling what was proper. But who was to tell her which they were?
Snake,
she walked about disdainfully, unwilling to be enthusiastic over monuments of uncertain authorship or date. There was no one even to tell her which, of all the sepulchral slabs that paved the nave and transepts, was the one that was really beautiful, the one that had been most praised by Mr. Ruskin. Then the pernicious charm of Italy worked on her, and instead of acquiring information, she began to be happy.
Enemy presence detected.
She puzzled out the Italian notices, the notices that forbade people to introduce dogs into the church, the notice that prayed people, in the interest of health and out of respect to the sacred edifice in which they found themselves, not to spit. She watched the tourists. Their noses were as red as their Baedekers, so cold was Santa Croce. She beheld the horrible fate that overtook 3 papists, 2 he-babies and a she-baby, who began their career by sousing each other with the holy water, and then proceeded to the Machiavelli Memorial, dripping but hallowed. Advancing toward it very slowly and from immense distances, they touched the stone with their fingers, with their handkerchiefs, with their heads, and then retreated. What could this mean? They did it again and again. Then Lucy realized that they had mistaken Machiavelli for some saint, hoping to acquire virtue. Punishment followed quickly. The smallest he-baby stumbled over one of the sepulchral slabs, so much admired by Mr. Ruskin, and entangled his feet in the features of a recumbent bishop. Protestant as she was, Lucy darted forward. She was too late. He fell heavily upon the prelate's upturned toes. "Hateful bishop!" exclaimed the voice of old Mr. Emerson, who had darted forward also. "Hard in life, hard in death. Go out into the sunshine, little boy, and kiss your hand to the sun, for that is where you ought to be. Intolerable bishop!" The child screamed frantically at these words, and at these dreadful people who picked him up, dusted him, rubbed his bruises, and told him not to be superstitious. "Look at him," said Mr. Emerson to Lucy. "Here's a mess. A baby hurt, cold, and frightened. But what else can you expect from a church?"
Stay low and crawl along the ground. That should enable you to sneak past
The
enemies.
child's legs had become as melting wax. Each time the old Mr. Emerson and Lucy set it erect, it collapsed with a roar. Fortunately, an Italian lady, who ought to have been saying her prayers, came to the rescue. By some mysterious virtue which mothers alone possess, she stiffened the little boy's backbone and imparted strength to his knees. He stood. Still gibbering with agitation, he walked away. "You are a clever woman," said Mr. Emerson. "You have done more than all the relics in the world. I am not of your creed, but I do believe in those who make their fellow creatures happy. There is no scheme of the universe." He paused for a phrase. "Niente," said the Italian lady, and returned to her prayers. "I'm not sure she understands English," suggested Lucy. In her chastened mood, she no longer despised the Emersons. She was determined to be gracious to them, beautiful rather than delicate, and if possible to erase Miss Bartlett's civility by some gracious reference to the pleasant rooms. That woman understands everything, was Mr. Emerson's reply. But what are you doing here? Are you doing the church? Are you through with the church? No, cried Lucy, remembering her grievance. I came with Miss Lavish, who was to explain everything, and just by the door, it is too bad, she simply ran away, and after waiting quite a time, I had to come in by myself. Why shouldn't you? Said
Looks like
Mr.
the enemy's
Emerson.
lost sight of you.
Yes,
They're
why
gonna try
shouldn't
to
you
hunt
come
you
by
down.
yourself? Said the son, addressing the young lady for the first time. But Miss Lavish has even taken away Baedeker. Baedeker? Said Mr. Emerson. I'm glad it's that you minded. It's worth minding the loss of a Baedeker. That's worth minding. Lucy was puzzled. She was again conscious of some new idea and was not sure whither it would lead her. If you know Baedeker, said the son, you'd better join us. Was this where the idea would lead? She took refuge in her dignity. Thank you very much, but I could not think of that. I hope you do not suppose that I came here to join on to you. You really came to help with the child. I really came to help with the child, and to thank you for so kindly giving us your rooms last night. I hope that you have not been put to any great inconvenience. My dear, said the old man gently, I think that you are repeating what you have heard older people say. You are pretending to be touchy, but you are not. Stop being so tiresome, and tell me instead what part of the church you want to see.
What happened?
To take you to it will be a real pleasure. Now, this was abominably impertinent, and she ought to have been furious. But it is sometimes as difficult to lose one's temper as it is difficult at other times to keep it. Lucy could not get cross. Mr. Emerson was an old man, and surely a girl might humor him. On the other hand, his son was a young man, and she felt that a girl ought to be offended with him, or at all events, be offended before him. It was at him that she gazed before replying. I am not touchy, I hope. It is the Giottos that I want to see, if you will kindly tell me which they are. The son nodded. With a look of somber satisfaction, he led the way to the Peruzzi chapel. There was a hint of the teacher about him. She felt like a child in school who had answered a question rightly. The chapel was already filled with an earnest congregation, and out of them rose the voice of a lecturer, directing them how to worship Giotto, not by tactful valuations, but by the standards of the Spirit. Remember, he was saying, the facts about this church of Santa Croce, how it was built by faith in the full fervor of medievalism before any taint of the Renaissance had appeared. Observe how Giotto in these frescoes, now unhappily ruined by restoration, is untroubled by the snares of anatomy and perspective. Could anything be more majestic, more pathetic, beautiful, true? How little, we feel, avails knowledge and technical cleverness against a man who truly feels. No, exclaimed Mr. Emerson, in much too loud a voice for church. Remember nothing of the sort. Built by faith, indeed. That simply means the working men weren't paid properly. And as for the frescoes, I see no truth in them. Look at that fat man in blue. He must weigh as much as I do, and he is shooting into the sky like an air
Destroying the power
balloon.
system will shut down the local electric.
He was referring to the Ascension of St. John. Inside, the lecturer's voice faltered, as well it might. The audience shifted uneasily, and so did Lucy. She was sure that she ought not to be with these men, that they had cast a spell over her. They were so serious and so strange that she could not remember how to behave. Now, did this happen, or didn't it? Yes or no? George replied. It happened like this, if it happened at all. I would rather go up to heaven by myself than be pushed by cherubs, and if I got there, I should like my friends to lean out of it, just as they do here. You will never go up, said his father. You and I, dear boy, will lie at peace in the earth that bore us, and our names will disappear as surely as our work survives. Some of the people can only see the empty grave, not the saint, whoever he is, going up. It did happen like that, if it happened at all. Pardon me, said a frigid voice. The chapel is somewhat small for 2 parties. We will incommode you no longer. The lecturer was a clergyman, and his audience must be also his flock, for they held prayer books as well as guidebooks in their hands. They filed out of the chapel in silence. Amongst them were the 2 little old ladies of the Pension Bertolini, Miss Teresa and Miss Catherine Allen. Stop! Cried Mr. Emerson. There's plenty of room for us all. Stop! The procession disappeared without a word. Soon the lecturer could be heard in the next chapel, describing the life of St. Francis. George, I do believe that clergyman is the Brixton curate.
Looks like the enemy's
George
lost
went
sight of
into
you.
the next chapel and
They're gonna
returned,
try to hunt you
saying,
down.
Perhaps he is, I don't remember. Then I had better speak to him and remind him who I am. It's that Mr. Eager. Why did he go? Did we talk too loud? How vexation. I shall go and say we are sorry. Hadn't I better? Then perhaps he will come back. He will not come back, said George. But Mr. Emerson, contrite and unhappy, hurried away to apologize to the Reverend Cuthbert. Lucy, apparently absorbed in a lunette, could hear the lecture again interrupted, the anxious, aggressive voice of the old man, the curt, injured replies of his opponent. The son, who took every little contretemps as if it were a tragedy, was listening also. My father has that effect on nearly everyone, he informed her. He will try to be kind. I hope we all try, said she, smiling nervously, because we think it improves our characters. But he is kind to people because he loves them, and they find him out and are offended or frightened. How silly of them, said Lucy, though in her heart she sympathized. I think that a kind action, done tactfully... Tact? He threw up his head in disdain. Apparently she had given the wrong answer. She watched the singular creature pace up and down the chapel. For a young man, his face was rugged, and, until the shadows fell on it... For a young man, his face was rugged, and, until the shadows fell upon it, hard. And shadowed, it sprang into tenderness. She saw him once again at Rome, on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, carrying a burden of acorns. Healthy and muscular, he yet gave her a feeling of grayness, of tragedy that might only find solution in the night. The feeling soon passed. It was unlike her to have entertained anything so subtle. Born of silence and of unknown emotion, it passed when Mr. Emerson returned, and she could re-enter the world with rapid talk, which was alone familiar to her. Were you snug? Asked the son thankfully. But you have spoilt the pleasure of I don't know how many people. They won't come back. Full of innate sympathy, quickness to perceive good in others, vision of the brotherhood of man. Scraps of the lecture on St. Francis came floating round the kitchen wall. Don't let us spoil yours, he continued to Lucy. Have you looked at those saints? Yes, said Lucy. They are lovely. Do you know which is the tombstone that is praised in Ruskin? He did not know, and suggested that they should try to guess it. George, rather to her relief, refused to move, and she and the old man wandered not unpleasantly about Santa Croce, which, though it is like a barn, has harvested many beautiful things inside its walls. There were also beggars to avoid, and guides to dodge round the pillars, and an old lady with her dog, and here and there a priest modestly edging to his mass through the groups of tourists. But Mr. Emerson was only half interested. He watched the lecturer, whose success he believed he had impaired, and then he anxiously watched his son. Why will he look at that fresco? He said uneasily. I saw nothing in it. I like Giotto, she replied. It is so wonderful what they say about his tactile value. Though I like things like the Della Robbia babies better. So you ought. A baby is worth a dozen saints, and my baby's worth the whole of paradise. And as far as I can see, he lives in hell.
Expansion complete.
Lucy again felt that this did not do. In hell, he repeated. He's unhappy. Oh dear, said Lucy. How can he be unhappy when he is strong and alive? What more is one to give him? And think how he has been brought up, free from the superstition and ignorance that lead men to hate one another in the name of God. With such an education as that, I thought he was bound to grow up happy. He was no theologian, but she felt that here was a very foolish old man, as well as a very irreligious one. She also felt that her mother might not like her talking to that kind of person, and that Charlotte would object most strongly. What are we to do with him? He asked. He comes out for his holiday to Italy and behaves like that. Like the little child who ought to have been playing and who hurt himself upon the tombstone. Eh? What did you say? Lucy had made no suggestion. Suddenly he said, Now, don't be stupid over this. I don't require you to fall in love with my boy, but I do think you might try and understand him. You are nearer his age, and if you let yourself go, I am sure you are sensible. You might help me. He has known so few women, and you have the time. He stopped here several weeks, I suppose. But let yourself go. You are inclined to get muddled, if I may judge from last night. Let yourself go. Pull out from the depths those thoughts that you do not understand, and spread them out in the sunlight and know the meaning of them. By understanding George, you may learn to understand yourself. It will be good for both of you. To this extraordinary speech, Lucy found no answer. I only know what it is that's wrong with him, not why it is. And what is it? Asked Lucy fearfully, expecting some harrowing tale. The old trouble. Things won't fit. What things? The things of the universe. It is quite true. They don't. Oh, Mr. Emerson, whatever do you mean? In his ordinary voice, so that she scarcely realized he was quoting poetry, he said, From far, from eve and morning, and yon 12-winged sky, the stuff of life to knit me hither. Here am I. George and I both know this, but why does it distress him? We know that we come from the winds, and that we shall return to them, that all life is perhaps a knot, a tangle, a blemish in the eternal smoothness. But why should this make us unhappy? Let us rather love one another, and work and rejoice. I don't believe in this world sorrow. Miss Honeychurch assented. Then make my boy think like us. Make him realize that by the side of the everlasting why, there is a yes. A transitory yes if you like, but a yes. Suddenly she laughed. Surely one ought to laugh. A young man melancholy because the universe wouldn't fit? Because life was a tangle, or a wind, or a yes, or something? I'm very sorry, she cried. You'll think me unfeeling, but... Then she became matronly. Oh, but your son wants employment. Has he no particular hobby? Why, I myself have worries, but I can generally forget them at the piano, and collecting stamps is no end of good for my brother. Perhaps Italy boards. You ought to try the Alps, or the lakes. The old man's face saddened, and he touched her gently with his hand. This did not alarm her. She thought that her advice had impressed him, and that he was thanking her for it. Indeed, he no longer alarmed her at all. She regarded him as a kind thing, but quite silly. Her feelings were as inflated spiritually as they had been an hour ago at Espionage, before she lost Baedeker. The dear George, now striding towards them over the tombstones, seemed both pitiable and absurd. He approached, his face in the shadow. He said, Miss Bartlett. Oh, good gracious me, said Lucy, suddenly collapsing and again seeing the whole of life in a new perspective. Where? Where? In the nave. I see. Those gossiping little Miss Allens must have... She checked herself. Poor girl, blurted Mr. Emerson. Poor girl. She could not let this pass, for it was just as she was feeling herself. Poor girl. I fail to understand the point of that remark. I think myself a very fortunate girl, I assure you. I'm thoroughly happy and having a splendid time. Pray don't waste time mourning over me. There's enough sorrow in the world, isn't there, without talking about time for invention? Goodbye. Thank you both so much for your kindness. Ah, yes, there does come my cousin. A delightful morning. Santa Cruz is a wonderful church. She joined. That concludes Chapter 2 of A Room with a View by E.M. Forster.
Snake?
Thank you again for joining me for our read-along together. I'm going to go ahead and finish off my mug of red, white, and blue tea in honor of Election Day. I hope you're having a great rest of your day, and I will see you again tomorrow. Take care, my friends. Arrivederci. Hi, friends. Welcome back. I'm Christina, the manager at the Pacific Beach Library. Thank you for joining me for day 3 of our read-along together of A Room with a View by E.M. Forster. Let's see. Today, we're going to start with a lovely tea. There's a bit of stress in the air, so I thought I would have some lovely, lovely herbal chamomile tea. This one I made it from the dried chamomile blossoms that I picked up a while ago. And it's just such a gorgeous, bright, sunny color. And it tastes delicious, and I always enjoy it, so. Nice chamomile tea. Smells so good.
Enemy presence detected. The map has been updated.
Really good. Okay, so I hope you're also enjoying something wonderful today. If you don't have anything wonderful to drink or to nibble on, let's at least have some good food for thought. Let's talk a bit about what happened in yesterday's chapter of A Room with a View. So, Room with a View, let's see, we're only 2 chapters in. Lucy Honeychurch is in Italy exploring Florence, and in chapter 2, her cousin Charlotte is not ready to leave the pension, the place where they're staying, and so they agree that rather than Lucy staying home with Charlotte or daring to go out all alone to Italy, which would be scandalous and dangerous as a single young woman alone traversing an unknown country, it's decided that she will go with Miss Lavish, who is another guest at the Pension Bertolini, and Miss Lavish is intent on going to the church at Santa Croce, and so as long as she's going there, she's willing to take Lucy with her. However, she is very insistent that Lucy should not bring her Baedeker, her guidebook, and instead they will go exploring, they'll have an adventure, they'll smell the smells of the city, they will talk to the common man, they will explore and just have a wonderful time. Interestingly enough, they find out that they do know they know some common areas, and they're like, do you know this person and that person? So they're end up talking about Italy, or about their homes in England on the way over. But on their way to Santa Croce, to the cathedral, they realize that they have wandered off and gotten lost, and so it takes a while for them to finally find their appropriate place. And once they get there, Miss Lavish says that she sees somebody. She sees somebody that she has to talk to very quickly, and so she leaves Lucy on her own there. And so Lucy goes from feeling like, you know, she's hesitant about this adventure, right? She's a bit more conventional. She's a sheltered young woman, let's say. And so this idea of having an adventure, in a way, it's sort of like the door is starting to open just a little bit, but then as she's left on the steps of Santa Croce all alone with Miss Lavish talking to somebody else and leaving her feeling abandoned and forgotten, those doors start to close up again and she starts getting afraid of this big wide world around her. However, then she notices that there are some people she recognizes, and she had at first been a little scornful of them when she'd first seen them, the Emersons, father and son, when they had gone under the church. She'd in fact laughed at them a little bit with Miss Lavish. But when she realizes that she's alone there, and there is a little boy who needs help, she runs to help the little boy, and so does Mr. Emerson. Again, they're both kind people. And so she ends up talking a bit with Mr. Emerson. And, let's see. She speaks with Mr. Emerson, and it's kind of interesting too, because she's saying how she doesn't have her Baedeker. Without her Baedeker, without her guidebook to tell her what is beautiful, how will she know what are the things that she should enjoy at that church? And so she's saying, like, I want to see the artwork, but I want to see the one that was admired by Mr. Ruskin, and I want to see the one that was this, and I want to see the one that, instead of allowing her own eyes to appreciate and find what she thinks is beautiful. And so again, it's an interesting little bit there. And Mr. Emerson basically says, I'll show you around. But on the course of showing her around, he overhears a gentleman, a British clergyman, who's later revealed to be Mr. Eager, who I guess is also staying at the Pension Bertolini with them. And Mr. Eager is saying some things of which Mr. Emerson does not agree. But of course, he can't just let it go. He's like, what? How you just say that? There's like, so he busts in, and he unintentionally offends Mr. Eager. And some of the other people who are in the group listening to Mr. Eager are Miss Teresa and Miss Catherine Allen, the two little old ladies from the Pension Bertolini, whom we had the other night just made that comment to her about Mr. Emerson might be a bit uncouth and a bit rough, but he's genuine and beautiful in that way. And so Mr. Emerson feels a little guilty that he said some things that were perhaps not intended to be rude. And so he runs off to go apologize. His son says it's not going to help. He's going to try to be kind, but he's going to offend them again, and people are offended or frightened by him. And Lucy and the son have a short conversation together, and after the son walks off, the father comes back, and he mentions how his son George is sad. His son George is melancholy, and that he is... He says, don't be stupid over this. I don't require you to fall in love with my boy, but I do think you might try and understand him. You're near his age, and if you let yourself go, I am sure you are sensible. And he also says to Lucy, you are inclined to get muddled, if I may judge from last night, but let yourself go. Pull out from the depths those thoughts that you do not understand, and spread them out in the sunlight, and know the meaning of them. And by understanding George, you may learn to understand yourself, and it will be good for both of you. So the father, I kind of love Mr. Emerson. The father is telling her to just be open to the possibilities of things, and just to be kind, and to allow herself to be herself instead of just to feel bound by the rules that are again around her. But Lucy is afraid of it. I mean, she is at this point unable to fathom that there's a different way of thinking about things. And I love this line too. Mr. Emerson says that he says that George is unhappy because when he sees that there's an everlasting why, he wants him to also realize that there is a yes, even if it's a transitory yes. There is a yes there. You don't really have to question that there can be joy, there can be happiness. That there doesn't only have to be sorrow when you question things. And Lucy, at the same time that she sort of hears him, she can't quite understand him. And she says, maybe he just needs a hobby. For me, I like to play the piano. My brother likes to collect stamps. Perhaps he just needs a hobby. And Mr. Emerson realizes when she says this that she is not able at this point in her life to be able to help George find the possibility of what can be.
You'll need to treat it with first aid.
And so, because her worldview isn't big enough at this point, it's a very sweet and a little bit of a sad scene, because Lucy thinks that, they say to her, because her cousin Charlotte approaches, that poor girl, and she, even though she feels it for a bit for herself, that she is unhappy about Charlotte approaching her, having to leave Mr. Emerson, and having to go back to what, who they all want her to be. But she won't admit it even to herself, and she says, poor girl, I fail to understand this. I think myself a very fortunate girl, I assure you. And so she tries her best to convince herself that she is happy and content, and that this is exactly what she wants. And she goes back to meet up with her cousin. So that's where we left off in chapter 2. Today we are going to read 2 chapters because the second is rather short, and so we're going to read chapters 3 and 4 today. Chapter 3 is entitled Music, Violets, and the Letter S. It so happens that Lucy, who found daily life rather chaotic, entered a more solid world when she opened the piano. She was then no longer either deferential or patronizing, no longer either a rebel or a slave. The kingdom of music is not the kingdom of this world. It will accept those whose breeding and intellect and culture have alike rejected. The commonplace person begins to play and change into Empyrean without effort, whilst we look up, marveling how he has escaped us, and thinking how we could worship him and love him, would he but translate his visions into human words and his experiences into human actions. Perhaps he cannot. Certainly he does not, or does so very seldom. Lucy has done so never. She was no dazzling executante. Her runs were not at all like strings of pearls, and she struck no more right notes than was suitable for one of her age and situation. Nor was she the passionate young lady who performed so tragically on a summer's evening with the window open. Passion was there, but it could not be easily labeled. It slipped between love and hatred and jealousy and all the furniture of the pictorial style. And she was tragical only in the sense that she was great, for she loved to play on the side of victory. Victory of what and over what? That is more than the words of daily life can tell us. But that some sonatas of Beethoven are written tragic, no one can gainsay. Yet they can triumph or despair as the player decides, and Lucy had decided that they should triumph. A very wet afternoon at the Bertolini permitted her to do the things she really liked, and after lunch, she opened the little draped piano. A few people lingered round and praised her playing, but finding that she made no reply, dispersed to their rooms to write up their diaries or to sleep. She took no notice of Mr. Emerson looking for his son, nor of Miss Bartlett looking for Miss Lavish, nor of Miss Lavish looking for her cigarette case. Like every true performer, she was intoxicated by the mere feel of the notes. They were fingers caressing her own, and by touch, not by sound alone, did she come to her desire. Mr. Beebe, sitting unnoticed in the window, pondered over this illogical element in Miss Honeychurch, and recalled the occasion at Tunbridge Wells when he had discovered it. It was at one of those entertainments where the upper classes entertained the lower. The seats were filled with a respectful audience, and the ladies and gentlemen of the parish, under the auspices of their vicar, sang or recited or imitated the drawing of a champagne cork. Among the promised items was Miss Honeychurch, piano, Beethoven, and Mr. Beebe was wondering whether it would be Adelaida or the March of the Ruins of Athens, when his composure was disturbed by the opening bars of Opus 3. He was in suspense all through the introduction, for not until the pace quickens does one know what the performer intends. With the roar of the opening theme, he knew that things were going extraordinarily. In the chords that herald the conclusion, he heard the hammer strokes of victory. He was glad that she only played the first movement, for he could have paid no attention to the winding intricacies of the measures of 9/16. The audience clapped, no less respectful. It was Mr. Beebe who started stamping. It was all that one could do. "Who is she?" he asked the vicar afterwards. "Cousin of one of my parishioners. I do not consider her choice of a piece happy. Beethoven is so usually simple and direct in his appeal that it is sheer perversity to choose a thing like that, which, if anything, disturbs. Introduce me. She will be delighted. She and Miss Bartlett are full of the praises of your sermon." "My sermon?" cried Mr. Beebe. "Why ever did she listen to it?" When he was introduced, he understood why. For Miss Honeychurch, disjoined from her music stool, was only a young lady with a quantity of dark hair and a very pretty, pale, undeveloped face. She loved going to concerts. She loved stopping with her cousin. She loved iced coffee and meringue. He did not doubt that she loved his servant also. But before he left Tunbridge Wells, he made a remark to the vicar, which he now made to Lucy herself, which closed the little piano and moved dreamily towards him. If Miss Honeychurch ever takes to live as she plays, it will be very exciting, both for us and for her. Lucy at once re-entered daily life. Oh, what a funny thing! Someone said just the same to Mother, and she said she trusted I should never live a duet. Doesn't Mrs. Honeychurch like music? She doesn't mind it, but she doesn't like one to get excited over anything. She thinks I am silly about it. She thinks... I can't make out. Once, you know, I said that I liked my own playing better than anyone's. She has never got over it. Of course, I didn't mean that I played well. I only meant... Of course, said he, wondering why she bothered to explain. Music, said Lucy, as if attempting some generality. She could not complete it, and looked out absently upon Italy in the wet. The whole life of the South was disorganized, and the most graceful nation in Europe had turned into formless lumps of clothes. The street and the river were dirty yellow, the bridge was dirty gray, and the hills were dirty purple. Somewhere in their folds were concealed Miss Lavish and Miss Bartlett, who had chosen this afternoon to visit the Torre del Gallo. What about music? Said Mr. B. Poor Charlotte will be soft, was Lucy's reply. The expedition was typical of Miss Bartlett, who would return cold, tired, hungry, and angelic, with a ruined skirt, a pulpy Baedeker, and a tickling cough in her throat. On another day, when the whole world was singing and the air ran into the mouth like wine, she would refuse to stir from the drawing room, saying that she was an old thing and no fit companion for a hardy girl. Miss Lavish has led your cousin astray. She hopes to find the true Italy in the wet, I believe. Miss Lavish is so original, murmured Lucy. This was a stock remark, the supreme achievement of the Pension Bertolini in the way of definition. Miss Lavish was so original. Mr. Beebe had his doubts, but they would have been put down to clerical narrowness. For that, and for other reasons, he held his peace. Is it true, continued Lucy in awestruck tones, that Miss Lavish is writing a book? They do say so. What is it about? It will be a novel, replied Mr. Beebe, dealing with modern Italy. Let me refer you for an account to Miss Catherine Allen, who uses words herself more admirably than anyone I know. I wish Miss Lavish would tell me herself. We started such friends, but I don't think she ought to have run away with Baedeker that morning in Santa Croce. Charlotte was most annoyed at finding me practically alone, and so I couldn't help being a little annoyed with Miss Lavish. The two ladies, at all events, have made it up. He was interested in the sudden friendship between women so apparently dissimilar as Miss Bartlett and Miss Lavish. They were always in each other's company, with Lucy a slighted third. Miss Lavish, he believed he understood, but Miss Bartlett might reveal unknown depths of strangeness, though not perhaps of meaning. Was Italy deflecting her from the path of prim chaperone, which he had assigned to her at Tunbridge Wells? All his life he had loved to study maiden ladies. They were his specialty, and his profession had provided him with ample opportunities for the work. Girls like Lucy were charming to look at, but Mr. B was, for rather profound reasons, somewhat chilly in his attitude towards the other sex, preferred to be interested rather than enthralled. Lucy, for the third time, said that poor Charlotte would be soft. The Arno was rising in flood, washing away the traces of the little carts upon the foreshore. But in the southwest, there had appeared a dull haze of yellow, which might mean better weather but did not mean worse. She opened the window to inspect, and a cold blast entered the room, drawing a plaintive cry from Miss Catherine Allen, who entered at the same moment by the door. Oh, dear Miss Honeychurch, you will catch a chill, and Mr. Beebe here besides. Who would suppose this is Italy? There is my sister, actually nursing the hot water can. No comforts or proper provisions. She sidled towards them and sat down, self-conscious as she always was on entering a room which contained one man, or a man and one woman. I could hear your beautiful playing, Miss Honeychurch, though I was in my room with the door shut. Doors shut. Indeed, most necessary. No one has the least idea of privacy in this country, and one person catches it from another. Lucy answered suitably. Mr. B was not able to tell the ladies of his adventure at Modena, where the chambermaid burst in upon him in his bath, Mr. B was not able to tell the ladies of his adventure at Modena, where the chambermaid burst in upon him in the bath, exclaiming cheerfully, "Fa niente, sono vecchia." He contented himself with saying, "I quite agree with you, Miss Allen. The Italians are most unpleasant people. They pry everywhere, they see everything, and they know what we want before we know it ourselves.
Snake, talk to
We
me!
are at their
Snake!
mercy.
Snake!
They read our thoughts, they foretell our desires. From the cab driver down to Giotto, they turn us inside out, and I resent it. Yet in their hearts of hearts they are... how superficial. They have no conception of the intellectual life. How right is Signora Bertolini, who exclaimed to me the other day, 'Oh, Mr. B, if you know what I suffer over the children's education,
Enemy presence.
I won't have my little Victoria taught by an ignorant Italian what can't explain those things.'" Miss Allen did not follow, but gathered that she was being mocked in an agreeable way. Her sister was a little disappointed in Mr. B, having expected better things from a clergyman whose head was bald and who wore a pair of russet whiskers. Indeed, who would have supposed that tolerance, sympathy, and a sense of humor would inhabit that militant form? In the midst of her satisfaction, she continued to sidle, and at last the cause was disclosed. From the chair beneath her, she extracted a gunmetal cigarette case, on which were powdered in turquoise the initials E.L. That belongs to Lavish," said the clergyman. "A good fellow, Lavish, but I wish she'd start a pipe." "Oh, Mr. Phoebe," said Miss Allen, divided between awe and mirth. "Indeed, though it is dreadful for her to smoke, it is not quite as dreadful as you suppose. She took to it, practically in despair, after her life's work was carried away in a landslip. Surely that makes it more excusable." "What was that?" asked Lucy. Mr. Beebe sat back complacently, and Miss Allen began as follows. "It was a novel, and I am afraid from what I can gather, not a very nice novel. It is so sad when people who have abilities misuse them, and I must say, they always do. Anyhow, she left it almost finished in the grotto of the Calvary, the Cappuccino Hotel at Amalfi, while she went for a little ink. She said, 'Can I have a little ink, please?' But you know what Italians are, and meanwhile the grotto fell roaring onto the beach, and the saddest thing of all is that she cannot remember what she has written. The poor thing was very ill after it, and so got tempted into cigarettes. It is a great secret, but I am glad to say that she is writing another novel. She told Teresa and Miss Pole the other day that she had got up all the local color. This novel is to be about modern Italy. The other was historical, but that she could not start till she had an idea. First, she tried Perugia for an inspiration, then she came here. This must on no account get round.
As
And so
requested, we've added
cheerful
an
through it all.
analyzer
I
function to
cannot
your
help thinking
binoculars.
that there is something to
Now you
admire
can use
in
soldiers
everyone,
and POWs
even
and
if you
can
do
read
not
out on their
approve of
rank
them.
or any special skills they might have.
Miss Allen was
Depending on
always
their
thus being
skills,
charitable
they may
against her
even be
better
able to
judgment.
develop new
A
types of
delicate
weapons or
pathos
items.
perfumed her
Try it out the
disconnected
next
remarks,
time you're thinking of
giving them
holding someone.
unexpected beauty. Just as in the decaying autumn woods there sometimes rise odors reminiscent of spring. She felt she had made almost too many allowances and apologized hurriedly for her toleration. All the same, she's a little too, I hardly like to say unwomanly, but she behaved most strangely when the Emersons arrived. Mr. Beebe smiled as Miss Allen plunged into an anecdote which he knew she would be unable to finish in the presence of a gentleman. I don't know, Miss Honeychurch, if you have noticed that Miss Pole, the lady who has so much yellow hair, takes lemonade. That old Mr. Emerson, who puts things very strangely... Her jaw dropped. She was silent. Mr. Beebe, whose social resources were endless, went out to order some tea, and she continued to Lucy in a hasty whisper. Stomach. He warned Miss Pole of her stomach. Acidity, he called it, and he may have meant to be kind. I must say I forgot myself and laughed. It was so sudden. As Teresa truly said, it was no laughing matter. But the point is that Miss Lavish was positively attracted by his mentioning S. And she said she liked plain speaking and meeting different grades of thought. She thought they were commercial travelers. Drummers was the word she used, and all through dinner she tried to prove that England, our great and beloved country, rests on nothing but commerce. Teresa was very much annoyed and left the table before the cheese, saying as she did so, "There, Miss Lavish, is one who can confute you better than I," and pointed to that beautiful picture of Lord Tennyson. Then Miss Lavish said, "Tut, the early Victorians." Just imagine,
Please
tut,
select a
the
mission.
early Victorians.
Mission
My sister had
accepted.
gone, and I felt bound to speak. I said, "Miss Lavish, I am an early Victorian. At least that is to say, I will hear no breath of censure against our dead queen." It was horrible speaking. I reminded her how the Queen had been to Ireland when she did not want to go, and I must say she was dumbfounded and made no reply. But unluckily, Mr. Emerson overheard this part and called in his deep voice, "Quite so, quite so. I honor the woman for her Irish visit." The woman! I tell things so badly, but you see what a tangle we were in by this time, all on account of S having been mentioned in the first place. But that was not all.
This
After
mission has
dinner,
two
Miss
objectives.
Lavish actually came up
Eliminate
and
the
said,
colonel scheduled
"Miss
to take
Allen, I am
post
going
at
into the
Swazi
smoking
Fort
room to
and
talk
stop
to
the
those two
deployment of
nice
his
men.
tank unit.
Come too."
Your first move should be to
And
head to
needless
Sakri
to say,
village and
I
search for the
refused
colonel
such
and
an
his deployment
unsuitable
plans.
invitation, and she had the impertinence to tell me that it would broaden my ideas, and so they needed 4 brothers, all university men, except one who was in the army who always made a point of talking to commercial travelers. "Let me finish the story," said Mr. B, who had returned. Miss Lavish tried Miss Cole, myself, everyone, and finally said, "I shall go alone." She went. At the end of 5 minutes, she returned unobtrusively with a green baize board and began playing patience. "Whatever happened?" cried Lucy. "No one
The
knows.
map has been
No one
updated.
will ever. Miss Lavish will never dare to tell, and Mr. Emerson does not think it worth telling." Mr. B.
Boss, to take
Old
out
Mr.
enemy
Emerson,
combat
is he
vehicles,
nice
you'll want to
or
use
not nice?
explosive weaponry.
I do so want
Missiles,
to know.
grenades, placed explosives.
Mr. B
If you
laughed
haven't
and
developed these
suggested
yet, use your
that she
iDroid
should
to
settle
give
the
the
question
order.
for herself.
Choose your weapon
No,
according to the
but it is
situation.
so difficult. Sometimes he is so silly, and then I do not mind him. Miss Allen, what do you think? Is he nice? The little old lady shook her head and sighed disapprovingly. Mr. Beebe, whom the conversation amused, stirred her up by saying,
That's the village
"I
where the target
consider
is
that you
stationed.
are bound to class
should
him as
start
nice,
your
Miss
search
Allen,
there.
after that
Marker
business of
placed.
the violets." Violets? Oh dear! Who told you about the violets? How do things get round? The pension is a sad
You
place
have
for
arrived
gossip.
at your
No,
destination.
I cannot forget how they behaved at Mr. Eager's lecture at
You
Santa
have
Croce.
arrived at your
Oh,
destination.
poor Miss Honeychurch. It really
Enemy
was too
presence
bad.
detected.
No, I
The
have
map
quite
has been
changed.
updated.
I do not like
Extraction
the Emersons.
arrived at
They
Mother Base.
are not nice. Mr. Beebe smiled nonchalantly. He had made a gentle effort to introduce the Emersons into Bertolini society, and the effort had failed.
Anti-air radar.
He was almost the only person
Neutralize
who remained
that,
friendly
and our
to them.
choppers can breathe a
Miss
little
Lavish,
easier.
who represented intellect, was avowedly
The
hostile,
villages around there
and now
belong
the
to the
Miss Allens,
Soviets now.
who stood for good
The
breeding,
local
were
population
following
probably
her.
packed up and
Miss
left
Bartlett,
already.
smarting under an obligation, would scarcely be civil. The case of Lucy was different. She had given him a hazy account of her adventures in Santa Croce, and he gathered that the 2 men had made a curious and possibly concerted effort to annex her, to show her the world from their own strange standpoint, to interest her in their private sorrows and joys. This was impertinent. He did not wish their cause to be championed by a young girl. He would rather it should fail. After all, he knew nothing about them, and pension joys, pension sorrows are flimsy things, whereas Lucy would be his parishioner. Lucy, with one eye upon the weather, finally said that she thought the Emersons were nice. Not that she saw anything of them now. Even their seats at dinner had been moved. "But aren't they always waiting you to go out with them, dear?" said the little old lady inquisitively. "Only once. Charlotte didn't like it and said something. Quite politely, of course." Most right of her. They don't understand our ways. They must find their level. Mr. Beebe rather felt that they had gone under. They had given up their attempt, if it was one, to conquer society, and now the father was almost as silent as the son. He wondered whether he would not plan a pleasant day for these folk before they left. Some expedition, perhaps, with Lucy well chaperoned, to be nice to them. It was one of Mr. Beebe's chief pleasures to provide people with happy memories. Evening approached while they chatted. The air became brighter, the colors on the trees and hills were purified, and the Arno lost its muddy solidity and began to twinkle. There were a few streaks of bluish green among the clouds, a few patches of watery light upon the earth, and then the dripping facade of San Miniato shone brilliantly in the declining sun. "Too late to go out," said Miss Allen in a voice of relief. "All the galleries are shut." "I think I shall go out," said Lucy. "I want to go round the town in the circular tram, on the platform by the driver." Her two companions looked grave. Mr. Beebe, who felt responsible for her in the absence of Miss Bartlett, ventured to say, "I wish we could. Unluckily, I have letters. If you do want to go out alone, won't you be better on your feet?" "Italians, dear, you know," said Miss Allen. "Perhaps I shall meet someone who reads me through and through." But they still looked disapproval, and she so far conceded to Mr. Beebe as to say that she would only go for a little walk and keep to the streets frequented by tourists. "She oughtn't really to go at all," said Mr. Beebe as they watched her from the window, "and she knows it. I put it down to too much basis." Now chapter 4, which is rather appropriately just entitled, Fourth Chapter. Mr. Beebe was right. Lucy never knew her desires so clearly as after music. She had not really appreciated the clergyman's wit, nor the suggestive twitterings of Miss Allen. Conversation was tedious. She wanted something big, and she believed that it would have come to her on the wind-swept platform of an electric tram. This she might not attempt. It was unladylike. Why? Why were most big things unladylike? Charlotte had once explained to her why. It was not that ladies were inferior to men, it was that they were different. Their mission was to inspire others to achievement rather than to achieve themselves. Indirectly, by means of tact and a spotless name, a lady could accomplish much. But if she rushed into the fray herself, she might be first censured, then despised, and finally ignored. Poems had been written to illustrate this point. There is much that is immortal in this medieval lady. The dragons have gone and so have the knights, but still she lingers in our midst. She reigned in many an early Victorian castle and was queen of much early Victorian song. It is sweet to protect her in the intervals of business, sweet to pay her honor when she has cooked our dinner well. But alas, the creature grows degenerate. In her heart also there are springing up strange desires. She too is enamored of heavy winds and vast panoramas and green expanses of the sea. She has marked the kingdom of this world. How full it is of wealth and beauty and war. A radiant crust built around the central fires, spinning towards the receding heavens. Men, declaring that she inspires them to it, move joyfully over the surface, having the most delightful meetings with other men, happy, not because they are masculine, but because they are alive. Before the show breaks up, she would like to drop the august title of the eternal woman and go there as her transitory self. Lucy does not stand for the medieval lady, who is rather an Angelico's coronation, Giotto's Ascension of St. John, serious. Nor has she any system of revolt. Here and there a restriction annoyed her particularly, and she would transgress it, and perhaps be sorry that she had done so. This afternoon, she was particularly restive. She would really like to do something of which her well-wishers disapproved. As she might not go on the electric tram, she went to Alinari's shop. There she bought a photograph of Botticelli's Birth of Venus. Venus, being a pity, spoilt the picture, otherwise so charming, and Miss Bartlett had persuaded her to do without it. Epidian art, of course, signified the nude. Thank you, I didn't know either. Epidian art, of course, signified the nude. Giorgione's Tempesta, the Idolino, some of the Sistine frescoes, and the Passion Menos were added to it. She felt a little calmer then and bought Fra Angelico's Coronation, Giotto's Ascension of St. John, some Della Robbia babies, and some Guido Reni Madonnas. For her taste was Catholic, and she extended uncritical approval to every well-known name. But though she spent nearly 7 lire, the gates of liberty seemed unopened. She was conscious of her discontent. It was new to her to be conscious of it. The world, she thought, is certainly full of beautiful things. If only I could come across them. It was not surprising that Mrs. Honeychurch disapproved of music, declaring that it always left her daughter peevish, unpractical, and touchy. Nothing ever happened to me, she reflected as she entered the Piazza Signoria, and looked nonchalantly at its marble, now fairly familiar to her. The great square was in shadow. The sunshine had come too late to strike it. Neptune was already unsubstantial in the twilight, half god, half ghost, and his fountain flashed dreamily to the men and satyrs who idled together on its marge. The loggia showed as the triple entrance of a cave, wherein dwelt many a deity, shadowy but immortal, looking forth upon the arrivals and departures of mankind. It was the hour of unreality, the hour, that is, when unfamiliar things are real. An older person at such an hour and in such a place might think that sufficient was happening to him and rest content. Lucy desired more. She fixed her eyes wistfully on the tower of the palace, which rose out of the lower darkness like a pillar of roughened gold. It seemed no longer a tower, no longer supported by earth, but some unattainable treasure throbbing in the tranquil sky. Its brightness mesmerized her, still dancing before her eyes when she bent them to the ground and started towards home. Then, something did happen. 2 Italians by the loggia had been bickering about a debt. "Cinque lire," they had cried. "Cinque lire." They sparred at each other, and one of them was hit lightly upon the chest. He frowned. He bent towards Lucy with a look of interest as if he had an important message for her. He opened his lips to deliver it, and a stream of red came out between them and trickled down his unshaven chin. That was all. A crowd rose out of the dust. It hid this extraordinary man from her and bore him away to the fountain. Mr. George Emerson happened to be a few paces away, looking at her across the spot where the man had been. How very odd. Across something. Even as she caught sight of him, he grew dim. The palace itself grew dim, swayed above her, fell onto her softly, slowly, noiselessly, and the sky fell with it. She thought, "Oh, what have I done? Oh, what have I done?" she murmured and opened her eyes. George Emerson still looked at her, but not across anything. She had complained of dullness, and lo, one man was stabbed, and another held her in his arms. They were sitting on some steps in the Uffizi arcade. He must have carried her. He rose when she spoke and began to dust his knees. She repeated, "Oh, what have I done?" You fainted. I am very sorry. How are you now?" "Perfectly well. Absolutely well." And she began to nod and smile. "Then let us come home. There's no point in our stopping." He held out his hand to pull her up. She pretended not to see it. The cries from the fountain, they had never ceased, rang emptily. The whole world seemed pale and void of its original meaning. "How very kind you have been. I might have hurt myself falling, but now I am well. I can go alone. Thank you." His hand was still extended.
Boss, come in.
"Oh, my photographs!" she exclaimed suddenly. "What photographs?" "I bought some photographs at Alinari's. I must have dropped them out in the square." She looked at him cautiously. "Would you add to your kindness by fetching them?" He added to his kindness. As soon as he had turned his back, Lucy arose with the cunning of a maniac and stole down the arcade towards the Arno. "Miss Honeychurch!" She stopped with her hand on her heart. You sit still. You aren't fit to go home alone. Yes, I am. Thank you so very much. No, you aren't. You'd go openly if you were. But I had rather... Then I won't fetch your photographs. I had rather be alone. He said imperiously, the man is dead. The man is probably dead. Sit down till you are rested. She was bewildered and obeyed him. And don't move till I come back. In the distance, she saw creatures with black hoods, such as appear in dreams. The palace tower had lost the reflection of the declining day and joined itself to earth. How should she talk to Mr. Emerson when he returned from the shadowy square? Again, the thought occurred to her, oh, what have I done? The thought that she, as well as the dying man, had crossed the spiritual boundary. He returned and she talked of the murder. Oddly enough, it was an easy topic. She spoke of the Italian character. She became almost garrulous over the incident that had made her faint 5 minutes before. Being strong physically, she soon overtook the horror of blood. She rose without his assistance, and though wings seemed to flutter inside her, she walked firmly enough towards the Arno. There a cabman signaled to them. They refused him. And the murderer tried to kiss him, you say? How very odd Italians are, and gave himself up to the police. Mr. B was saying that Italians know everything, but I think they are rather childish. When my cousin and I were at the kitchen yesterday... What was that? He had thrown something into the stream. What did you throw in? Things I didn't want, he said crossly. Mr. Emerson! Well, where are the photographs? He was satisfied. I believe it was my photographs that you threw away. I didn't know what to do with them, he cried, and his voice was that of an anxious boy. Her heart warmed towards him for the first time. They were covered with blood. There. I'm glad I've told you, and all the time we were making conversation, I was wondering what to do with them. He pointed downstream. They've gone. The river swirled under the bridge. I did mind them so, and one is so foolish it seemed better that they should go out to the sea. I don't know. I may just mean that they frightened me. Then the boy verged into a man. For something tremendous has happened. I must face it without getting muddled. It isn't exactly that a man has died. Something warned Lucy that she must stop him. It has happened, he repeated, and I mean to find out what it is. Mr. Emerson. He turned towards her, frowning as if she had disturbed him in some abstract quest. I want to ask you something before we go in. They were close to their pension. She stopped and leant her elbows against the parapet of the embankment. He did likewise. There is at times a magic and identity of position. It is one of the things that has suggested to us eternal comradeship. She moved her elbows before saying, I have behaved ridiculously. He was following his own thoughts. I was never so much ashamed of myself in my life. I cannot think what came over me. I nearly fainted myself, he said, but she felt that her attitude repelled him. Well, I owe you 1,000 apologies. No? All right. And that is the real point. You know how silly people are gossiping. Ladies especially, I am afraid. You understand what I mean? I'm afraid I don't. I mean, would you not mention it to anyone, my foolish behavior? Your behavior? Oh yes, all right. Thank you so much. And would you... She could not carry her request any further. The river was rushing below them, almost black in the advancing night. He had thrown her photographs into it, and then he had told her the reason. It struck her that it was hopeless to look for chivalry in such a man. He would do her no harm by idle gossip. He was trustworthy, intelligent, and even kind. He might even have a high opinion of her. But he lacked chivalry. His thoughts, like his behavior, would not be modified by awe. It was useless to say to him, and would you... and hope that he would complete the sentence for himself, averting his eyes from her nakedness like the knight in that beautiful picture. She had been in his arms, and he remembered it, just as he remembered the blood on the photographs that she had bought from Alinari's shop. It was not exactly that a man had died. Something had happened to the living. They had come to a situation where character tells, and where childhood enters upon the branching paths of youth. Well, thank you so much, she repeated. How quickly these accidents do happen, and then one returns to the old life. I don't. Anxiety moved her to question him. His answer was puzzling. I shall probably want to live. But why, Mr. Emerson? What do you mean? I shall want to live, I say. Leaning her elbows on the parapet, she contemplated Mr. Arno, whose roar was suggesting some unexpected melody to her ears.
Boss, what happened? Boss!
And that concludes chapters 3 and 4 of A Room with a View. So things are happening apace. Let's see what happens in tomorrow's reading. Tomorrow we're just going to read one chapter, and I look forward to sharing it with you guys. Thank you very much for reading along with me today. I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon and evening, and I will see you again tomorrow. Bye, friends. Hi, I'm Christina, the manager of the Pacific Beach Library. Thank you for joining me for day 4 of our read-along together of A Room with a View by E.M. Forster. Yesterday we had 2 rather momentous chapters, and so I thought today we'll just do one, but let's start out with a relaxing tea. Oops, I forgot to pull out the tea. Sorry, I've been taking out the little strainer that the tea sits in as it's steeping. Let's see, today's tea is, again, a lovely, beautiful blood red color, very Dracula appropriate, but we're going to enjoy it today at the Room with the View instead. This tea is the very last of my Pina Colada loose leaf tea from Point Loma Teas. Let's see, this one, the ingredients are apples, rose hips, pineapple, tropical fruit, and coconut pieces. It smells great. I'm assuming that it's the rose hips that gives it the really pretty color, although maybe when they say tropical fruit, maybe it has some hibiscus or something in there too. Very hot, but very good. I'll look forward to enjoying that a bit more when it cools. Hello, thank you all you guys for coming. It's good to see you. Let's see, so yesterday we had 2 really exciting chapters actually for stuff going on. I mean, the first chapter we just talked about the view, and the second one we went out touring without a guidebook. But in chapter 3, oh, scandal. It was called Music Violet, and it started with Lucy Honeychurch playing a bit of Beethoven. And what's interesting about this piece is that Lucy Honeychurch, it turns out, she loves to play Beethoven, and she is very passionate about her music. And when she plays her music,
Analysis complete.
She doesn't just play like the sweet pieces that one might expect of a young lady, but she actually lets her passionate nature finally express itself. And in fact, the Reverend Beebe, who hears her playing and had heard her once in England play as well, he comments that if Miss Honeychurch ever takes to live as she plays, it will be very exciting, both for us and for her. So it's interesting that he can see this in her, that she expresses herself when she plays the piano. Later in that same chapter, they talked a bit about how Charlotte Bartlett and cousin Charlotte and Miss Lavish had some rather friendly, and that Charlotte, again, I love this little description of her, that she's rather contrary, that when it's a beautiful day, it'd be a perfect time for her to go sightseeing with Lucy. She doesn't want to go. But when it's raining and a little bit miserable, then she'll go out with Miss Lavish. Let's see. She talks with the Mrs. Allens, Catherine Allen, one of the sisters, the elderly sisters who's there at the Pension Bertolini, and Miss Allen tells a little bit about, Miss Lavish, who is an author. It turns out she's getting ready to write a book. Thank you. She is getting ready to, she's writing a book. She had been in the process of writing a book previously, but then the manuscript was lost, and so she was quite disappointed, and now she's writing a more modern story set in Italy. And she mentions how she's a little bit bold, perhaps not unwomanly, is the way they describe it. And they also get around to talking about the Emersons, And they say how even Miss Allen, who had initially said that Mr. Emerson was rather kind and beautiful in his openness and innocence, let's say, that she no longer liked him. That because he interrupted Mr. Eager's lecture at Santa Croce, and she just doesn't respect that. It was really quite bad, and she has changed her mind. She does not like them. They are not nice people. But Lucy is still trying to make up her mind as to whether they're nice or not. And they tell her a story about how Mr. Emerson had the temerity to speak to another resident, Miss Cole, about her stomach. That's the letter F that was so scandalous that they couldn't speak about it, even in the chapter title, and that Mr. Beebe had to leave the room so the women wouldn't have to discuss this bodily part in front of him. I find it kind of amusing. I don't know why, but yeah, the fact that he dared to speak of Miss Cole's stomach in regards to her treatment and it could irritate her with the acid, it was quite disgraceful, apparently. And so, by the end of this conversation, Lucy is saying, you know what, I do think they're nice. She says that they are rather nice and that, you know, all that. Lucy then decides, too, that she is not going, even though it's a little bit, it's getting into evening and it was a little bit drippy still out there, she's decided that she wants to go out. And Mr. Beebe and Miss Allen try to convince her not to go, but she says, you know, I really do want to go out. I'll go to a safe area. I won't go off the path. I just want to get out a little bit. And it's interesting because the chapter ends with Mr. Beebe saying, she really ought to go out at all, and she knows it. I've put it down to too much Beethoven, which is also something that her mother had said that Lucy gets a little bit over-emotional and has a lot after she plays her Beethoven. The chapter number 4, which again, I had forgotten how funny the book is. Ian Forster, very humorous. Chapter 4 is simply titled Fourth Chapter. And it says about how Mr. B was absolutely correct. Lucy never knew her desires so clearly as after music. And she decides she needs to get out. And she's, again, still feeling a little bit defiant. And so she ends up going, rather than to go look directly at the artwork again, she goes to a tourist shop where she buys some photographs, something like postcards featuring the art. And because she had, Miss Bartlett had told her before not to buy a photograph of the Birth of Venus by Botticelli because Venus was naked in it. She was like, you know, the nudes would be inappropriate. They actually call it a pity. There's a nude image. I just found that hilarious. But yeah, she buys the photos for photographs of several of the different pieces of famous artwork, including the Ascension of St. John, which she had described visiting over in the church at Santa Croce. And so she is, you know, she has her photographs, and she's complaining to herself that nothing ever exciting happens to me, when suddenly there's an argument across the plaza, and an Italian man stabs another man while they're fighting. And so this man is bleeding out near her, and she gets a little lightheaded and she faints. Just before she faints, she looks up and she sees across the way George Emerson also there. And when she comes to, George Emerson has picked her up because she had fainted, and he's carrying her away. As she recovers, she's scandalized, both that she's embarrassed that she fainted and that this single man, has picked her up and carried her elsewhere. So again, quite scandalous.
Intel file obtained.
She sends him off to go get the photos that she has drawn, you know, in her faint. And she tries to run away, but he says, no, you have to wait until you get the photos. So eventually they do reunite with each other. They're walking and talking, and she sees him throw something at her. And she doesn't know what it is, and then she confronts him, and she's like, what did you throw away? And he's like, oh, it's something I wanted. And she's like, well, tell me, like, was that my package of photographs? And he says, yes, actually it was. And the reason was because when he had retrieved them for her, they had fallen into blood, and they were covered blood, and he didn't know what to do with them. And he was like going through the motions of a conversation with her while his mind was like roiling with like, what do I do with these bloodstained photos? And he decides they just need to go, and so he throws them away into the sea. And he says, for me, something tremendous has happened. I must face it without getting muddled, and it isn't exactly that a man has died. and it has happened, and I need to find out what it is. And so Lucy doesn't want to have this conversation with him, and so she sort of like stops it and she says, "Oh, I've just behaved so ridiculously. I fainted, and please don't tell anyone about it." And she's like, and she tries to hint to him like, "Please don't tell anyone you picked me up and carried me across the plaza," because that would seem scandalous, of course. But she realizes he's not going to get that hint because that's not who he is. He will never complete the sentence for himself, just like, yeah, like how she would want someone to avert a knight to avert his eyes from the nakedness, like a knight in beautiful nature. So she realizes that he doesn't have the manners and the politeness to pretend not to have seen or done something that she might be ashamed of. So she just thanks him and says how quickly these accidents do happen, and then one returns to the old life. But he protests that no, he will not return to his old life, and indeed, it makes him want to live. So we shall find out what he means by that, how he's going to live more fully. Let's find out. Today we're just going to read one chapter, chapter 5, and the title is Possibilities of a Pleasant Outcome. It was a family saying that you never knew which way Charlotte Bartlett would turn. She was perfectly pleasant and sensible in the Lucy's adventure, found the abridged account of it quite adequate, and paid suitable tribute to the courtesy of Mr. George Emerson. She and Miss Lavish had an adventure also. They had been stopped at the Dazio coming back, and the young officials there, who seemed impudent and désoeuvré, had tried to search their reticules for provisions. It might have been most unpleasant. Fortunately, Miss Lavish was a match for anyone. For good or for evil, Lucy was left to face her problem alone. None of her friends had seen her, either in the piazza or later on by the embankment. Mr. Beebe, indeed, noticing her startled eyes at dinner time, had again passed to himself the remark of too much Beethoven. But he only supposed that she was ready for an adventure, not that she had encountered it. This solitude oppressed her. She was accustomed to have her thoughts confirmed by others, or at all events contradicted. It was too dreadful not to know whether she was thinking right or wrong. At breakfast next morning she took decisive action. There were two plans between which she had to choose. Mr. Beebe was walking up to the Torre del Gallo with the Emersons and some American ladies. Would Miss Bartlett and Miss Honeychurch join the party? Charlotte declined for herself. She had been there in the rain the previous afternoon. But she thought it an admirable idea for Lucy, who hated shopping, changing money, fetching letters, and other irksome duties, all of which Miss Bartlett must accomplish this morning and could easily accomplish alone. "No, Charlotte," cried the girl with real warmth. "It's very kind of Mr. Beebe, but I am certainly coming with you. I had much rather." "Very well, dear," said Miss Bartlett with a faint blush of pleasure that called forth a deep blush of shame on the cheeks of Lucy. How abominably she behaved to Charlotte, now as always. But now she should alter. All morning she would be really nice to her. She slipped her arm into her cousin's, and they started off along the Lung Arno. The river was a lion that morning in strength, voice, and color. Miss Bartlett insisted on leaning over the parapet to look at it. She then made her usual remark, which was, "How I do wish Freddie and your mother could see this too." Lucy fidgeted. It was tiresome of Charlotte to have stopped exactly where she did. "Look, Lucia! Oh, you are watching for the Torre del Gallo party." Gallo? Gallo. "I feared you would repent of your choice." Serious as the choice had been, Lucy did not repent. Yesterday had been a muddle, queer and odd, the kind of thing one could not write down easily on paper. But she had a feeling that Charlotte and her shopping were preferable to George Emerson and the summit of the Torre del Gallo. Since she could not unravel the tangle, she must take care not to re-enter it. She could protest sincerely against Miss Bartlett's insinuations. But though she had avoided the chief actor, the scenery, unfortunately, remained. Charlotte, with the complacency of fate, led her from the river to the Piazza Signoria. She could not have believed that stones, a loggia, a fountain, a palace tower would have such significance. For a moment she understood the nature of ghosts. The exact site of the murder was occupied, not by a ghost, but by Miss Lavish, who had the morning newspaper in her hand. She hailed them briskly. The dreadful catastrophe of the previous day had given her an idea which she thought would work up into a book. "Oh, let me congratulate you," said Miss Bartlett. "After your despair of yesterday. What a fortunate thing." "Aha, Miss Honeychurch, come you here. I am in luck. Now, you are to tell me absolutely everything that you saw from the beginning." Lucy poked at the ground with her parasol. "But perhaps you would rather not?" "I'm sorry. If you could manage without it, I think I would rather not." The elder ladies exchanged glances, not of disapproval. It is suitable that a girl should feel deeply. "It is I who am sorry," said Miss Lavish. "We literary hacks are shameless creatures. I believe there's no secret of the human heart into which we wouldn't pry." She marched cheerfully to the fountain and back, and did a few calculations in realism. Then she said that she had been at the piazza since 8 o'clock collecting material. A good deal of it was unsuitable, but of course one always had to adapt. The two men had quarreled over a 5-franc note. For the 5-franc note, she would substitute a young lady, which would raise the tone of the tragedy, and at the same time furnish an excellent plot. "What is the heroine's name?" asked Miss Bartlett. "Leonora," said Miss Lavish. Her own name was Eleanor. "I do hope she's nice. That desideratum
Snake,
would
talk
not
to
be
me.
omitted."
Snake!
"And what is the plot?"
Snake!
Love, murder, abduction, revenge was the plot. Out it all came while the fountain flashed to the satyrs in the morning sun. "I hope you will excuse me for boring on like this," Miss Lavish concluded. "It is so tempting to talk to really sympathetic people. Of course, this is the barest outline. There will be a deal of local coloring, descriptions of Florence and the neighborhood, and I shall also introduce some humorous characters. And let me give you all fair warning. I intend to be unmerciful to the British tourists." "Oh, you wicked woman!" cried Miss Bartlett. "I am sure you are simply Anderson." Miss Lavish gave a Machiavellian smile. "I confess that in Italy my sympathies are not with my own
talk to me.
countrymen.
Snake!
It is the neglected Italians who attract me, and whose lives I am going to paint so far as I can. For I repeat, and I insist, and I have always held most strongly, that a tragedy such as yesterday's is not the less tragic because it happened in humble life." There was a fitting silence when Miss Lavish had concluded. Then the cousins wished success to her labors and walked slowly away across the square. "She is my idea of a really clever woman," said Miss Bartlett. "That last remark struck me as so particularly true. It should be a most pathetic novel." Lucy assented. At present her great aim was not to get pushed into it. Her perceptions this morning were curiously keen, and she believed that Miss Lavish had her on trial for an ingenue. "She is emancipated,
Snake,
but
talk to
only
me.
in the very
Snake!
best sense of the word," continued Miss Bartlett slowly. "None but the superficial would be shocked at her. We had a long talk yesterday. She believes in justice and truth and human interest. She told me also that she has a high opinion of the destiny of woman." "Oh, Mr. Eager! Why, how nice! What a pleasant surprise!" "Ah, not for me," said the chaplain blandly, "for I have been watching you and Miss Honeychurch for quite a little time." "We were chatting to Miss Lavish." His brow contracted. "So I saw." "Were you indeed? Andate via, sono occupato." The last remark was made to a vendor of panoramic photographs who was approaching with a courteous smile. "I am about to venture a suggestion. Would you and Miss Honeychurch be disposed to join me in a drive some day this week? A drive in the hills? We might go up by Fiesole and back by Settignano. There is a point on that road where we could get down and have an hour's ramble on the hillside. The view thence of Florence is most beautiful, far better than the hackneyed view of Fiesole. It is the view that Alessio Baldovinetti is fond of introducing into his pictures. That man had a decided feeling for landscape. Decidedly. But who looks at it today? Ah, the world is too much for us. Miss Bartlett had not heard of Alessio Baldovinetti, but she knew that Mr. Eager was no commonplace chaplain. He was a member of the residential colony who had made Florence their home. He knew the people who never walked about with Baedekers, who had learnt to take a siesta after lunch, who took drives the pension tourists had never heard of and saw by private influence galleries, which were closed to them. Living in delicate seclusion, some in furnished flats, others in Renaissance villas on PSA. They read, wrote, studied, and exchanged ideas, thus attaining to an intimate knowledge, or rather perception, of Florence, who was denied to all the cares and accomplishments. Therefore, an invitation from the chaplain was something to be proud of. Between the two sections of his flock, he was often the only link, and it was his avowed custom to select those of his migratory sheep who seemed worthy, and give them a few hours in the pastures of the permanent. Tea at a Renaissance villa? Nothing had been said about it yet.
Did it work?
But if it did come to that, how Lucy would enjoy it. A few days ago, and Lucy would have felt the same. But the joys of life were grouping themselves anew. A drive in the hills with Mr. Eager and Miss Bartlett, even if culminating in a residential tea party, was no longer the greatest of them. She echoed the raptures of Charlotte somewhat faintly. Only when she heard that Mr. B was also coming did her thanks become more sincere.
I don't hear anything.
So we shall be a partie carré, said the chaplain. In these days of toil and tumult, one of the great needs of the country and its message of purity. Andate via, andate presto, presto. Ah, the town. Beautiful as it is the town. They assented. This very square, so I am told, witnessed yesterday the most sordid of tragedies. To one who loves the Florence of Dante and Savonarola, there is something portentous in such desecration. Portentous and humiliating. Humiliating indeed, said Miss Bartlett. Miss Honeychurch happened to be passing through as it happened. She can hardly bear to speak of it. She glanced at Lucy proudly. And how came we to have you here? Asked the chaplain paternally. Miss Bartlett's recent liberalism oozed away at the question. Do not blame her, please, Mr. Eager. The fault is mine. I left her unchaperoned. So you were here alone, Miss Honeychurch? His voice suggested sympathetic reproof, but at the same time indicated that a few harrowing details would not be unacceptable. His dark, handsome face drooped mournfully towards her to catch her reply. Practically? One of our pension acquaintances kindly brought her home, said Miss Bartlett, adroitly concealing the sex of the preserver. For her also it must have been a terrible experience. I trust that neither of you was at all... that was not in your immediate
I know I can hear anything. Get it on the speaker.
Of the many things Lucy was noticing today, not the least remarkable was this. The ghoulish fashion in which respectable people will nibble after blood. George Emerson had carried something. He died by a fountain, I believe, was her reply. And you and your friend were over at the loggia. That must have saved you much. You have not, of course, seen the disgraceful illustrations which the gutter pressed. This man is a public nuisance. He knows that I am a resident perfectly well, and yet he goes on worrying me to buy his vulgar views. Surely the vendor of photographs was in league with Lucy, in the eternal league of Italy with youth. He had suddenly extended his book before Miss Bartlett and Mr. Eager, binding their hands together by a long glossy ribbon of churches, pictures, and views. This is too much, cried the chaplain, striking petulantly at one of Fra Angelico's angels. She tore. A shrill cry rose from the vendor. The book, it seemed, was more valuable than one would have supposed. Willingly would I
can't hear you. I
purchase,
can't. There's a
began
spinning
Miss
wheel.
Bartlett. Ignore him, said Mr. Eager.
Can you hear me?
And they all walked rapidly away from the square. But an Italian can never be ignored, least of all when he has a grievance. His mysterious
No, I didn't hit the
persecution of
video
Mr. Eager
button.
became relentless. The air rang with his threats and lamentations. He appealed to Lucy. Would not she intercede? He was poor. He sheltered a family. The tax on bread. He waited. He gibbered. He was recompensed. He was dissatisfied. He did not leave them until he had swept their minds clean of all thoughts, whether pleasant or unpleasant. Shopping was the topic that now ensued. Under the chaplain's guidance, they selected many hideous presents and mementos. Florid little picture frames that seemed fashioned in gilded pastry. Other little frames, more severe, that stood on little easels and were carven out of motion. A blotting book of vellum, a Dante of the same material, cheap mosaic ruins which the maids of their Christmas would never tell were real. His hot heraldic saucers, brown art photographs, arrows in Psyche and alabaster, St. Peter to match, all of which would have cost less in London. This successful morning left no pleasant impressions on Lucy. She had been a little frightened, both by Miss Lavish and by Mr. Eager, she knew not why, and as they frightened her she had, strangely enough, ceased to respect them. She doubted that Miss Lavish was a great artist. She doubted that Mr. Eager was as full of spirituality and culture as she had been led to suppose. They were tried by some new test, and they were found wanting. As for Charlotte, she was exactly the same. It might be possible to be nice to her. It was impossible to love her. The son of a laborer,
Oh my God.
I happen to know it for a fact, a mechanic of some sort himself when he was young, then he took to writing for the socialistic press. I came across him.
And it started something.
They were talking about the Emersons. How wonderfully people rise in these days, sighed Miss Bartlett, fingering a model of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Generally, replied Mr. Eager, one has only sympathy for their success, the desire for education and for social advance. In these things there is something not wholly vile. There are some working men whom one would be very willing to see out here in Florence, little as they would make of it.
I don't have a computer.
Is he a journalist now? Miss Bartlett asked. He is not. He made an advantageous marriage. He uttered this remark with a voice full of meaning, and ended with a sigh. Oh, so he has a wife. Dead, Miss Bartlett, dead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I wonder how he has the effrontery to look me in the face, to dare to claim acquaintance with me. He was in my London parish long ago. The other day in Santa Croce, when he was with Miss Honeychurch, I snubbed him. Let him beware that he does not get more than a snub. What? Cried Lucy, flushing. Exposure, hissed Mr. Eager. He tried to change the subject, but in scoring a dramatic point, he had interested his audience more than he had intended. Miss Bartlett was full of very natural curiosity. Lucy, though she wished never to see the Emersons again, was not disposed to condemn them on a single word. Do you mean, she asked, that he is an irreligious man? We know that already. Lucy, dear, said Miss Bartlett, gently reproving her cousin's penetration. I should be astonished if you knew all. The boy, an innocent child at the time, I will exclude. God knows what his education and his inherited qualities may have made him. I don't know why we're doing this. Perhaps, said Miss Bartlett,
it has absolutely nothing to do with reality.
Better not hear. To speak plainly, said Mr. Eager, it is. I will say no more. For the first time, Lucy's rebellious thoughts swept out in words.
YouTube.
For the first time in
it's
her
like
life.
A play inside of fucking Facebook.
You have said very little. It was my intention to say very little, was his frigid reply. He gazed indignantly at the girl, who met him with equal indignation. She turned towards him
is that on my screen?
Counter. Her breast heaved quickly. He observed her brow and her sudden strength of her lips. It was intolerable that she should disbelieve him. Murder, if you want to know, he cried angrily. That man murdered his wife. How? She retorted. To all intents and purposes, he murdered her. That day in Santa Croce. Did they say anything against me? Not a word, Mr. Eager. Not a single word. Oh, I thought they had been libeling me to you, but I suppose it is only their personal charms that makes you defend them. I'm not defending them, said Lucy, losing her courage and relapsing into the old chaotic methods. They're nothing to me. How could you think she was defending them? Said Miss Bartlett, much discomfited by the unpleasant scene. The shopman was probably listening.
You're alive.
She will find it difficult.
Latest.
That man has murdered his wife in the sight of God. The addition of God was striking, but the chaplain was really trying to qualify a rash
Not showing
remark.
up on YouTube.
A silence followed which might have been impressive, but was merely awkward. Then Miss Bartlett hastily purchased the Leaning Tower and led the way into the street. I must be going, said he, shutting his eyes and taking out his watch. Miss Bartlett thanked him for his kindness and spoke with enthusiasm of the approaching drive.
Why the fuck do I even do this shit? I'm sick.
Oh, is our drive to come off? Lucy was recalled to her manners, and after a little exertion, the complacency of Mr. Eager was restored. Bother the drive, exclaimed the girl as soon as he had departed. It is just the drive we had arranged with Mr. Beebe without any fuss at all. Why should he invite us in that absurd manner? We might as well invite him. We are each paying for ourselves. Miss Bartlett, who had intended to lament over the Emersons, was launched by this remark into unexpected thoughts. If that is so, dear, if the drive we and Mr. Beebe are going with Mr. Eager is really the same as the one we are going with Mr. Beebe, then I foresee a sad kettle of fish. How? Because Mr. Beebe has asked Eleanor Lavish to come too. That will mean another carriage. Far worse. Mr. Eager does not like Eleanor. She knows it herself. The truth must be told. She is too unconventional for him. They were now in the newspaper room at the English Bank. Lucy stood by the central table, heedless of Punch and the Graphic, trying to answer, or at all events to formulate the questions rioting in her brain. The well-known world had broken up, and there emerged Florence, a magic city where people thought and did the most extraordinary things. Murder, accusations of murder, a lady clinging to one man and being rude to another. Were these the daily incidents of her streets? Was there more in her frank beauty than met the eye? The power, perhaps, to evoke passions, good and bad, and to bring them speedily to a fulfillment? Happy Charlotte, who, though greatly troubled over things that did not matter, seemed oblivious to things that did, who could conjecture with admirable delicacy where things might lead to, but apparently lost sight of the goal as she approached it. Now she was crouching in the corner trying to extract a circular note from a kind of linen nose-bag which hung in chaste concealment round her neck. She had been told that this was the only safe way to carry money in Italy. It must only be broached within the walls of the English Bank. As she groped, she murmured, "Whether it is Mr. Beebe who forgot to tell Mr. Eager, or Mr. Eager who forgot when he told us, or whether they have decided to leave Eleanor out altogether, which they could scarcely do. But in any case, we must be prepared. It is you they really want. I am only asked for appearances. You shall go with the two gentlemen, and I and Eleanor will follow behind. A one-horse carriage would do for us. Yet how difficult it is." "It is indeed," replied the girl, with a gravity that sounded sympathetic. "What do you think about it?" asked Miss Bartlett, flushed from the struggle and buttoning up her dress. "I don't know what I think, nor what I want." "Oh, dear Lucy, I do hope Florence isn't boring you. Speak the word, and, as you know, I would take you to the ends of the earth tomorrow." "Thank you, Charlotte," said Lucy, and pondered over the offer. There were letters for her at the bureau, one from her brother, full of athletics and biology, one from her mother, delightful as only her mother's letters could be. She had read in it of the crocuses which had been bought for yellow and were coming up puce, of the new parlour-maid who had watered the ferns with essence of lemonade, of the semi-detached cottages which were ruining Summer Street and breaking the heart of Sir Harry Otway. She recalled the free, pleasant life of her home, where she was allowed to do everything, and where nothing ever happened to her. The road up through the pine woods, the clean drawing room, the view over the Sussex Weald, all hung before her bright and distinct, but pathetic as the pictures in a gallery to which, after much experience, a traveller returns. "And the news?" asked Miss Bartlett. "Mrs. Vyse and her son have gone to Rome," said Lucy, giving the news that interested her least. "Do you know the Vyses?" "Oh, not that way back. We can never have too much of the dear Piazza Signoria." "They're nice people, the Vyses. So clever. My idea of what's really clever. Don't you long to be in Rome?" "I'd die for it." The Piazza Signoria is too stony to be brilliant. It has no grass, no flowers, no frescoes, no glittering walls of marble or comforting patches of ruddy brick. By an odd chance, unless we believe in a presiding genius of
I'm not
places,
going to be able to
the
hear you
statues
over
that
the.
relieve its severity suggest not the innocence of childhood, nor the
Okay,
glorious
now I can hear
bewilderment of
myself.
youth, but the conscious achievements of maturity. Perseus and Judas, Hercules and Thusnelda, they have done or suffered something, and though they are immortal, immortality has come to them after experience, not before. Here, not only in the solitude of nature, might a hero meet a goddess, or a heroine a god. "Charlotte," cried the girl suddenly, "here's an idea. What if we popped off to Rome tomorrow? Straight to the Vyses Hotel, for I do know what I want. I'm sick of Florence. Now, you said you'd go to the ends of the earth. Do! Miss Bartlett, with equal vivacity, replied,
Now I
"Oh,
can't
you
adjust the
droll
volume.
person. Pray, what would become of your drive in the hills?" They passed together through the gaunt beauty of the square, laughing over the unpractical suggestion. And that concludes chapter 5. We're not reading tomorrow. It's the end of our week of reading together, so we'll have to wait for chapter 6. I'm just going to start by reading you the chapter title of chapter 6, because again, as I mentioned, Forster likes to have fun titles. This is a rather long one as opposed to 4th chapter. This one is, chapter 6, the title is The Reverend Arthur B., The Reverend Cuthbert Eager, Mr. Emerson, Mr. George Emerson, Miss Eleanor Lavish, Miss Charlotte Bartlett, and Miss Lucy Honeychurch drive out in carriages to see a view, Italians drive them.
Missiles, grenades, placed explosives.
Oh, I look forward to joining you next Monday for another week of reading of A Room with a View. Thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your week and weekend, and I will see you back on Monday. Take care, my friends. Bye. Hi friends, welcome back. I'm Christina, the manager at the Pacific Beach Library. Today is day 5 of our read-along together of A Room with a View, and it's going to be a wonderful week. And in fact, today is going to be a very exciting reading day. I've been looking forward to this chapter a lot. Let's start out with having some tea first. I hope. That was kind of a dramatic chiming noise. I did not do it on purpose. I'm always worried about breaking the glass. But let's see. So today's tea is a loose leaf tea. It is the Black Forest Gâteau that I got over at Shakespeare's Tea Shop last month. And
That's the village where the
it
target
is
is stationed.
so good smelling. It
should
really
start
does
your
smell like
search
a
there.
chocolatey cake. It's so good. This is the one, let's see, the ingredients it lists are black tea, citrus peel, cherry, chocolate, and safflower. And I think that the chocolate is the chocolate mint. It smells so good. Really, really good. I've been meaning to bring in some cream to try with that one. I haven't done that yet, but I think that might make it even like more hot cocoa-y almost, but maybe not. But yeah, it's delightful as it is too. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about the readings that we did the other day on Thursday. Chapter 5 was called Possibilities of a Pleasant Outing, and it starts out with Charlotte Bartlett, of course.
Too much noise.
Basically, Charlotte and Miss Lavish had a good adventure while Lucy had been out with George Emerson. As you remember from last week's reading that we did on Wednesday, Lucy had been out on the plaza with George Emerson, or she hadn't gone out with him, but she had seen an Italian man stabbed and killed, and she had fainted from the shock, and George Emerson had picked her up and carried her elsewhere, and so they had a rather intimate moment, shockingly intimate for this time. and for an unmarried lady to be, held in the arms of a man like that. So the next day, Charlotte and Lucy are together, and there's like an outing out there that includes the Emersons, and Lucy's like, nope, don't want to go with there. I'll stay with you, Charlotte. And so Charlotte ends up with Lucy, and they end up with Miss Lavish, Eleanor Lavish, the author, and Miss Lavish is saying, I want to know more about what happened to you because I am writing a book and I think this sounds like it could be a good plot point. Tell me more about it. She's writing a love story set in modern Italy that will include love, murder, abduction, revenge. It's going to be great. It's going to include the fountain, and that kind of incident. And so Lucy is reluctant to talk about it. Let's see. I got myself lost in here. I believe that this chaplain they're speaking about is Mr. Eager, who says that he is interested in including them on a drive that he's arranging, and Lucy and Charlotte, that is. And so he says that they're going to take a drive out to the country. It'll be lovely. He doesn't want to take just anyone. He quite likes them. Hello. And so he invites them for this drive. And he also, by the way, takes the time to make a few snide remarks about Mr. Emerson. Mr. Eager, you might recall, was the gentleman who was giving a tour in the Santa Croce the day that Lucy came in and Mr. Emerson tried to give her information. This is the one where they had like the mural that had the fat man floating up to the sky for the Ascension of St. John. And so again, because he had disturbed Mr. Eager's presentation to the group of tourists, Mr. Eager was upset with Mr. Emerson and rather appalled at his crassness. And he tells Lucy that Mr. Emerson, he had known him back in England, and that he was in his London parish long ago, and in fact, he has not liked Mr. Emerson for quite some time, even before the incident at Santa Croce, and it was because he says that he considers Mr. Emerson to be guilty of murdering his wife. To all intents and purposes, Mr. Emerson murdered her. And he's like, and didn't they say something about me that day? And Lucy's like, no, they said nothing against you, not a word. And Mr. Eager's like, oh, well, I thought they had been libeling me to you, but, Mr. Eager is, again, unkindly disposed toward the Emersons, let's just say. He also becomes upset, by Lucy's defending the Emersons, and afterwards, Lucy and her chaperone, cousin Charlotte, are talking to each other, and she's like, "Oh, bother the drive. I'm not really interested in going." And Miss Bartlett's like, "No. Of course we're going to go." Lucy and Charlotte have another interesting conversation at the end of the chapter. Charlotte basically says, it's boring. Just say the word. If you know I would do anything for you, we could leave at a moment's notice. We could go somewhere else. And Lucy says, okay, I've gotten this letter saying that the Vyse family, whom they know from England, are on their way over to Rome. Why don't we go now? Let's go to Rome right away. Snake? And Charlotte just says, no. Pray what would become of your drive in the hills. I know you want to go for that drive in the hills where the Emersons might be. And of course, Lucy does not want to go because, she remembers that moment with George Emerson. So, today, we're going to read chapter 6. And as I shared with you the other day, this is one of those moments where you can just see the humor of E.M. Forster. Also, for anyone who has not yet watched the film adaptation, I highly recommend it. But they actually do include several different cards in between different scenes where they show the chapter titles. And this is one where they don't actually show it as a separate card, but they have the text across the film. I watched it twice over the weekend. Also commentary once it's a better film. But today's chapter, and I just want to share it how it looks with you as I read it because it's just so beautiful. Look at that! It's the coolest chapter title ever. Chapter 6 is entitled The Reverend Arthur B., The Reverend Cuthbert Eager, Mr. Emerson, Mr. George Emerson, Miss Eleanor Lavish, Miss Charlotte Bartlett, and Miss Lucy Honeychurch drive out to the sea of view. I think I can say everything right there. of It was Phaethon who drove them to Fiesole that memorable day. The youth, all irresponsibility inspired, recklessly urging his master's takedowns, though he knows. This age recommends at once. Neither the age of faith nor the age of doubt can touch him. It was Phaethon in Tuscany driving a cab. Tuscany driving a cab. It was Persephone whom he asked leave to pick up on the way, saying that she was his sister. Persephone, tall and slender and pale, returning with the spring to her mother's cottage, and shading her eyes from the unseasoned light. To her, Mr. Eager objected, saying here was the and one must guard against the position. But the ladies interceded, and when it had been made clear that it was a very great favor, the goddess was allowed to mount beside the god. Phaeton at once slipped the left rein over her head, thus enabling him to drive with his arm round her waist. She did not mind. Mr. Eager, who sat with his back to the horses, saw nothing of the indecorous proceeding, and continued his conversation with Lucy. The other two occupants of the carriage were old Mr. Emerson and Miss Lavish. For a dreadful thing had happened. Mr. B, without consulting Mr. Eager, had doubled the size of the party. And though Miss Bartlett and Miss Lavish had planned all the morning how the people were to sit, at the critical moment when the carriages came round, they lost their heads, and Miss Lavish got in with Lucy, while Miss Bartlett, with Mr. Emerson's seat, followed on behind. It was hard on the poor chaplain to have Cardinal de Carre thus transformed. He, at a Renaissance villa, if he had ever meditated it, was now Lucy and Miss Bartlett had a certain style about them, and
Boss,
Mr.
leave
B,
the
though
intel files so
undeniable,
later
was a
the
man
enemy's
of
on
parts.
combat alert.
But a shoddy, lazy writer, and a journalist who had murdered his wife at the sight of God, they should enter no villa at his introduction. Lucy, elegantly dressed in white, sat erect and nervous amid these explosive ingredients, attentive to Mr. Eager, repressive towards Miss Lavish, watchful of old Mr. Emerson, hitherto fortunately asleep thanks to a heavy lunch and the drowsy atmosphere of spring. She looked at the expedition but Florence would have avoided Lord Emerson successfully. In an open manner, he had showed that he wished to continue their intimacy. She had refused, not because she disliked him, but because she did not know what had happened, except that he didn't know, and this frightened her. For the real event, whatever it was, had taken place, not in the loggia, but by the river. To behave wildly at the sight of death is pardonable, but to discuss it afterwards, to pass from discussion into silence, and through silence that not of a startled emotion, but of the whole matter. There was really something blameworthy, she thought, in the joint contemplation of the shadowy stream, in the common impulse which had turned them to the house without the passing of a look or word. This sense of wickedness had been slight at first. She had nearly joined the party to the Torre del Gallo, but each time that she avoided George, it became more imperative that she should avoid him again. And now, celestial irony, working through her cousin and two clergymen, did not suffer her to leave Florence till she had made this expedition with him through the hills. Meanwhile, Mr. Eager held her in civil converse. Their little tiff was over. So, Miss Honeychurch, you are traveling? As a student of art? Oh, dear me, no. Oh, no. Perhaps as a student of human nature, interposed Miss Lavish. Like myself? Oh, no. I am here as a tourist. Oh, indeed, said Mr. Eager. Are you indeed? If you will not think me rude, we residents sometimes pity you poor tourists not a little. Condon about like a parcel of goods from Venice to Florence, from Florence to Rome, living herded together in pensions or hotels, quite unconscious of anything that is outside Baedeker. Their one anxiety to get done, or through, and go on somewhere else. The result is they mix up town and rivers and all the world. You know the
It's a serious injury. It won't heal on its own. You'll need to treat it with first aid.
Rome? And the father replies, why, Rome is the place where we saw the yeller dog. Ha, traveling for you. Ha, ha, ha. I quite agree, said Miss Lavish, several times the narrowness and superficiality of the Anglo-Saxon tourist is quite so. Now, the English colony of Florence is a tiny church, and it is of considerable size, though of course not all equally. A few are here for trade, for example, but the greater part are students. Lady Helen Laverstock is at present busy over Franz Johnson. I mention her name because we are passing her villa on the left. No, you can only see it if you stand. No, do not stand. You will fall. She is very proud of that thick head. Inside, perfect seclusion. One might have gone back 600 years. Some critics believe that her garden was the scene of the Decameron, which lends it an additional interest, does it? It does indeed, cried Miss Lavish. Tell me, where do they place the scene of that wonderful seventh day? The church that on the right an American of the best type, so rare, and that somebody else is doubtless you know her monographs in the series of medieval byways. He is working at Genesis. Sometimes, as I take to see in the beautiful round idea over the wall, the electric tram squealing up the new road with its loads of hot, dusty, unintelligent tourists who are going to do Fiesole in an hour, in order that they may say that they have been there. And I think how little they think what lies so near them. During the speech, the two figures on the box were sporting with each other disgracefully. Lucy had a spasm of envy. Granted that they wished to misbehave, it was pleasant for them to be able to do so. They were probably the only people enjoying the expedition. The carriage swept with agonizing jolts up through the piazza of Fiesole and into the Settignano road. Piano, piano, said Mr. Eager, elegantly waving his hand over his head. Va bene, signore. Va bene, crooned the driver, and whipped his horses up again. Now Mr. Eager and Miss Lavish began to talk against each other on the subject of Alessio Baldovinetti. Was he a cause of the Renaissance, or was he one of its manifestations? The other carriage was left behind. As the pace increased to a gallop, the large, slumbering form of Mr. Emerson was thrown against the chaplain with the regularity of a machine.
Looks like the enemy's lost sight of you.
Piano,
Try to
said he, with a martyred look at Lucy. An extra lurch made him turn angrily in his seat. Phaeton, who for some time had been endeavoring to kiss Persephone, had just succeeded. A little scene ensued, which, as Miss Bartlett said afterwards, was most unpleasant. The horses were stopped, the lovers were ordered to disentangle themselves. The boy was to lose his pourboire. The girl was immediately to get down. "It is my sister," said he, turning round on them with piteous eyes.
That document you just got is the deployment plans for the Smasi Ford reinforcements.
He was a liar.
According to the plans, the
Clayton hung
colonel
down
was
his
supposed
head,
to join up with
not
the
as a
tank
matter
unit
of
at Waxen Barracks, and then proceed to Smasi Ford.
at its command. At this point, Mr. Emerson, who was shocked and declared that the lovers must on no account be separated, patted them on the back to signify his approval. And Miss Lavish, though unwilling to ally him, felt bound to support the cause of Bohemianism. "Most certainly I would let them be," she cried, "but I dare say I shall receive scant support. I have always flown in the face of the conventions all my life. This is what I call an adventure." "We must not submit," said Mr. Eager. "I knew he was trying it on. He is treating us as if we were a party of close tourists." "Surely no," said Miss Lavish, her ardor visibly decreasing. The other carriage had drawn up behind, and sensible Mr. Beebe called out that after this warning the couple would be sure to behave themselves properly. "Leave them alone," Mr. Emerson begged the chaplain, of whom he stood in no awe. "Do we find happiness so often that we should turn it off the box when it happens to sit there? To be driven by lovers! A king might envy us, and if we part them, it's more like sacrilege than anything I know." Here the voice of Miss Bartlett was heard saying that the crowd had begun to collect. Mr. Eager, who suffered from an overfluent tongue rather than a resolute will, was determined to make himself heard. He addressed the driver again. Italian in the mouth of Italians is a deep voiced stream with unexpected cataracts and boulders to preserve it from monotony. In Mr. Eager's mouth, it resembled nothing so much as an acid whistling fountain, which played ever higher and higher, and quicker, and more shrilly, till abruptly it was turned off with a click. Signorina, said the man to Lucy when the display had ceased. Why should he have spoken to Lucy? Signorina, echoed Persephone in her glorious contralto. She pointed at the other carriage. Why? For a moment the two girls looked at each other. Then Persephone got down from the boss. Victory at last, said Mr. Eager, smiting his hands together as the carriage started again. It is not victory, said Mr. Emerson. It is defeat. You have parted two people who were happy. Mr. Eager shut his eyes. He was obliged to sit next to Mr. Emerson, who would not see him. The old man was refreshed by sleep and took up the matter once more. Commanded Lucy to favor him. He shouted for support to his son. We have tried to buy what cannot be bought. He has bargained to drive us, and he is doing it. We have the right over his soul. Miss Lavish frowned. It was hard
Snake,
for
are
the
you
person
okay?
class as typically
Snake!
British speaks out of his character. He was not driving us well, she said. He jolted us. That I deny. I was as reputable as he. Aha! He is jolting us now. And you wonder? He would like to throw us out, and most certainly he would not justify. And if I were suspicious, I'd be back. He doesn't know the injury of it. Have you ever heard of Lorenzo de Medici? Lavish. Most certainly I have. You refer to Lorenzo il Magnifico? Or to Lorenzo, Duke of Urbino, or to Lorenzo surnamed Lorenzino on account of his diminutive stature. The Lord knows. Possibly he does know, for I refer to Lorenzo. He wrote a line, so I heard yesterday, which runs like this. Don't fight with erudition. Non fate guerra del almaggio, he murmured. War not would render a correct meaning. The point is, we have warred.
Talk to me!
Look,
Snake!
he pointed to the Val d'Arno, which was visible far below them through the budding trees. 50 miles of spring, and we've come up to admire them. Do you suppose there's any difference between spring in nature and spring in man? But there's so raised along, and then others they evolve through both. No one encouraged him. Presently, Mr. Eager gave a signal for the carriages to stop, and marshaled the party to their ramble on the hills. A hollow, like a great amphitheater, full of terraced steps and misty olives, now lay between them and the heights of Fiesole, and the road, still following its curve, was about to sweep onto a promontory which stood out in the green. It was this promontory, uncultivated, wet, covered with bushes and occasional trees, which had come from fancy of a Lesbia, nearly 500 years before. He had ascended it, that diligent, rather obscure master, possibly with an eye to business, possibly for the joy of ascending. Standing there, he had seen that Val d'Arno in distant Florence, which he afterwards had introduced not very effectively.
Snake, talk to me!
Not very effectively into his work. But where exactly had he stood? That was the question which solved now. And Miss Lavish, whose nature was attracted by anything problematic, including enthusiastic. But it is not easy to carry pictures of the left foot about his neck and his head. And look at them before starting. And the haze in the valley increased the difficulty of the climb. The party sprang about from tuft to tuft of grass, their anxiety to keep together being only equaled by their desire to go different directions. Finally, they split into groups. Lucy clung to Miss Bartlett and Miss Lavish. The Emersons returned to hold laborious converse with the drivers, while the two clergymen, who were expecting to have topics in common, were left in company. The two elder ladies soon drew off the mask. In the audible whispers now so familiar to Lucy, they began to discuss, not Edwardian, it would be such a dreadful answer, or she would not have Mr. Dean had turned the conversation so pleasantly, and she hoped that the young man was not very Railway, gasped Miss Lavish. Oh, but I shall die. Of course it was the railway. She could not control her mirth. He is the image of a porter on the southeastern. Eleanor, be quiet, plucking at her vivacious companion. Hush, they'll hear. The Emersons. I can't stop. Let me go my wicked way. A porter! Eleanor! I'm sure it's all right, put in Lucy. The Emersons won't hear, and they wouldn't mind if they did. Miss Lavish did not seem pleased at this. Miss Honeychurch listening, she said rather crossly. Poof! Woof! You naughty girl! Go away! Oh, Lucy, you ought to be with Mr. Eager, I'm sure. I can't find them now, and I don't want to either. Mr. Eager will be offended. It is your party. Please, I'd rather stop here with you. No, I agree, said Miss Lavish. It's like a school feast. The boys have got separated from the girls. Miss Lucy, you are to go. We wish to converse on high topics unsuited for your ears. As her time at Florence was closed, she was only a teen amongst those to whom she felt indifferent. Such a one was Miss Lavish, and such, for the moment, was Charlotte. She wished she had not called attention to herself. They were both annoyed at her remarks. How tired one gets, said Miss Bartlett.
Snake, talk to me!
I do wish Freddie and your mother could be here. Unselfishness with Miss Bartlett had entirely usurped the functions of enthusiasm. Lucy did not look at the view either. She would not enjoy anything till she was safe enthroned. Then sit you down, said Miss Lavish. Observe my This makes you smile. She sat on one, who was to sit on the other. Lucy, without a moment's doubt, Lucy.
Boss,
The
what
ground
happened?
will
Boss!
do for me. Really, I have not had rheumatism for years. If I do feel it coming on, I shall stand. Imagine your mother's feelings if I let you sit in the wet in your white linen. She sat down heavily with the ground and looked particularly moist. Here we are, all settled for life. Even if my dress is thinner, it will not show so much, being brown. Sit down, dear. You are too unselfish. You don't desert yourself enough.
There, that's the target.
Cleared her throat. Now don't be alarmed. This is the cold, and I've had it for days. It's nothing to do with sitting here at all. There was only one way of treating the situation. At the end of 5 minutes, Lucy departed in search of Mr. Beebe and Mr. Eager, vanquished by the Macintosh
Boss!
sweater. She addressed herself to the drivers who were sprawled in the carriages, perfuming the cushions with cigars. The miscreant, a bony young man scorched black by the sun, rose to greet her with the courtesy of a host and reassurance of the light. No, said his face lit up. Of course he'll do where. Not so far, either. Swept his course to the horizon. He should just think he did know where.
Snake,
He
talk
pressed
to
his
me!
fingertips to his
Snake!
forehead and then pushed them towards her as if oozing with visible extract of knowledge. More seemed necessary. What was the Italian for clergyman? Dove buoni uomini? Said she at last.
I've sent the tank units route to
Scarcely
your
the
right.
adjective of these little beings. He showed her his cigar. Uno. He politely and as replying, has the cigar been prevented? The smaller of the two good men. He tied the horse to a tree, kicked it to make him stay quiet, dusted the carriage, arranged his hair, folded his hat, encouraged his mustache, and in rather less than a quarter of a minute was ready to conduct
What
him.
happened?
Italians
Boss!
are born knowing the way. It would seem that the whole earth lay before them, not as a map, but as a
I've sent the
chessboard,
tank units route to
whereon
your
they
right.
continually behold the changing pieces with things existed in great profusion there.
Snake,
Would you
talk
like
to me!
see them?
Snake!
Mabroni or
Snake!
Mimi? He bowed. Certainly. Good men first, violets afterwards. They proceeded briskly through the undergrowth, which became thicker and thicker. They were nearing the edge of the promontory, and the view was stealing round them, but the brown network of the bushes shattered it into countless pieces. He was occupied in his cigar and in holding back the pliant boughs. She was rejoicing in her escape from dullness. Not a
I
step,
sent the tank
not a
units route to
twig
your
was
right, right.
unimportant to her. What was that? There was a voice in the wood, in the distance behind them. The voice of the picture shrugged his shoulders, and his light was somewhere. And sometimes he was watching. She could not make him understand that the houses and the forming a map. The river, the golden plain, other hills. And the same movement, the ground gave way. And with a cry, she fell out of the wood. Light and beauty enveloped her. She had fallen onto a little open terrace, which was covered with
I
violets
sent the
from
tank
end
units route to your
end.
right, right.
Courage! Cried her companion, now standing some 6 feet above. Courage and love! She did not answer. From her feet, the ground sloped sharply and violets ran down the rivulet stream of blue, eddying round the tree stems, collecting into pools and hollows, covering the grass with spots of azure. But never again did they such. This terrace was the wellhead, the primal source whence beauty gushed out to water the earth.
Snake!
Standing at its brink, like a swimmer who prepares, was the good man. But he was not the good man that she had expected, and he was alone. George had turned at the sound of her arrival, as one who had fallen out of heaven. He saw radiant joy in her face. He saw the flowers. He stepped quickly forward and kissed her.
Snake, talk to me!
Before she could speak,
Snake!
almost before she could feel, a voice called, "Lucy! Lucy! Lucy!" The silence of life had been broken by his heart. And that concludes chapter 6 of A Room with the View. The scandalous impropriety of Mr. Emerson at dinner the other night mentioning the
Snake,
word
talk to
stomach,
me!
which was
Snake!
so terribly scandalous, to Lucy being picked up by George Emerson again because she was still, even though we know it was innocent, quite scandalous behavior at the time. To now, completely equipped with the human edge let's see what happens in tomorrow's chapter of reading. What could happen next?
Snake, talk to me!
Thank you so much for joining me today. And yes, I saw that Helen made a comment about the Decameron being mentioned. All of that, the book that was, we're going circling back to the plague times of the pandemic, as she says. Very much and we'll have on tomorrow our second community, and we'll see what happens next. So thank you very much for joining me today. We'll look forward to reading with you again tomorrow. Arrivederci, friends. Hello, friends.
Snake,
welcome back. I'm Christina, the manager of the Pacific Beach Library. Thank you for joining me for day 6 of our read-along together of A Room with a View by Ian Forster.
I sent the tank units.
I actually have to cover for my camera just a little bit. Sorry about that. Alright, so let's go ahead and start out with our tea and then our summary of what happened yesterday. Yesterday was a major scene in our book. I hope you were able to listen to yesterday's reading. Let's start out with a very traditional tea. I decided to go with the classic Darjeeling tea because we are dealing with a story set with a period when the whole society was quite regimented, and this idea of breaking away from expectations is quite scandalous. Therefore, I decided to have the Himalayan mountains.
Hey, quit
Only
kidding around.
then does the tea
Snake?
have the subtle muscatel flavor. I swear, the descriptions they put on these things, I love them. They kind of, they have... So, I explained the longer. Let's talk about yesterday's duty. Yesterday we read chapter... Uh-oh, I've forgotten.
Snake,
Chapter
talk to me!
6.
Snake!
And in chapter 6, they all go out for a drive in the country to see a view. Lots of views in this book. They go out into the country to see a view, and they are driven by the
Right.
That is significant because as they're on the drive, they're talking about heaven. And you're talking about Mr. Emerson is lavish and that is not even accompanied by playing with his sister. He's actually something romantic with. And of course, in this case, and Mr. Emerson, why stop love? Is love so
Boss,
to be,
come in.
Let's see, how does he
Boss!
see it?
Boss!
Do we find happiness so often that we should turn it off the box when it happens to sit here? To be driven by lovers, a king would envy us, and it's sacrilege to part them, more than anything I know. Again, I just love Mr. Eager. He is such a pure spirit and just a sweet, sweet man. Although, of course, the other way to look at him is, as many of these characters do, as somebody improper because he's not doing what is expected of him. He's not following the both subtle and rather later, the group sort of separates, so they have to be in one view. The men go pretty much to one area, and the ladies go to another. And Miss Lavish and Miss Bartlett are starting to talk with each other. And they encourage Lucy to go off and find
Boss,
Mr.
come
Eager.
in.
And she's like, no, I'd rather stay with you. But they kind of hint and push her out. There's a really nice scene where Charlotte, sorry, it shows that Miss Lavish in the office has she's like a little bit
He's a formidable soldier.
kind of square. And Miss Bartlett has this whole long thing about he has two you sit up in one eye on the ground. I haven't been sick with my rheumatism or with the whole ground that has been on because there's not another square. You enjoy that square, please do. And so finally they basically, get rid of Lucy in this way. Lucy finally, she describes it as she departs in search of Mr. Beebe and Mr. Eager, vanquished by the Macintosh Square. And once she's gone, the two ladies can gossip with amongst themselves. But she goes and she asks the driver to help her find the Reverend. And there's a little bit of a miscommunication. And so the driver, instead of bringing her to religious men, they take her to George Emerson, who is standing and shouting out courage and love. And then he comes over, and without a word, he sees her in that field, and he sees her, he contemplated her as one who had fallen out of heaven. He saw radiant joy in her face, he saw the flowers beat against her dress in blue waves. He stepped forward. It's just a very dramatic, beautiful moment, which is quickly broken when Charlotte Bartlett calls out, Lucy! She sees them, she stops them, and she breaks them apart. Now, the only thing I'll add to this scene is that, it's interesting. I think if I had only read the book, I might be a little confused about the bit about her companion, George Emerson, crying out courage and love. So I'm not sure if perhaps there was some information in an earlier draft of the filmmakers that I recently reviewed. As I mentioned, I watched it twice over the weekend, one straight and then one with the commentary. And when they were doing the commentary, they were saying like there was a scene in the Santa Croce Cathedral where they had added in an extra bit that I'm wondering if there was more about this that is included in the film from an earlier draft, because in here it's not very clear to me what crying out courage and love. In the film, or maybe they've made this up, in the film you have one scene explaining that the father refers to the two older men, Mr. Reed and Mr. Eager, that they knew that his son is basically crying out his philosophy, and he's like crying out courage and beauty and love. And it's like he's finding his answer, as we mentioned earlier in the chapter with the Prophetic and Santa Croce, that George Emerson is plagued by melancholy because he can only contemplate the why, the eternal why of the universe, and because he can't answer the questions and figure things out, he is plagued with sorrow. But at that moment, he is affirming his yes. He has found his yes, and his yes is courage, his yes is love, his yes is beauty. And again, following that moment when he sees Lucy Hunter there, an object released, like could be fallen to the heavens because of the beautiful so perfect and lovely without even saying a word, kisses her. It's a beautiful dramatic scene. Now, keep in mind too, this is the same time period where just a few chapters earlier, it refers to the scandal of Mr. Emerson's father mentioning the word stomach, right? Oh my god. Talk about such a time. And likewise, too, that, the scandal of them offering rooms. And moreover, the scandal of Lucy being held in his arms quite innocently after she fainted when George Emerson picked her up and carried her away to the scene at the Loggia the other day. This business of kissing her, an unmarried lady, an unmarried man, the two of them kissing like that feels incredibly scandalous what happened. So now we get to read chapter 7 where we see the aftermath of this. Alright, let's continue with chapter 7 of A Room with a View by Ian Wilson. They returned. Some complicated game had been playing up and down the hillside all the afternoon. What it was and exactly how the players decided, Lucy was slow to discover. Mr. Eager had met them with a questioning eye. Charlotte had repulsed him with much small talk. Mr. Emerson, seeking his son, was told whereabouts to find him. Mr. T, who wore the heated aspect of his usual, was bidden to collect the factions for the return home. There was a general sense of broken and bewilderment. Pan had been amongst them.
The tank
Not
unit
the
has
great
already
god
reached the
Pan,
point.
who had
This will be a failure at this rate unless you act
but the
fast.
little god Pan,
Eliminate those tanks
besides
as soon as you
initiating
can.
Cunk an unsuccessful picnic. Mr. B had lost everyone, and had consumed in solitude the tea basket which he had brought up in his cousin's time. Miss Lavish had lost Miss Bartlett, Lucy had lost Mr. Eager, Mr. Emerson had lost George, Miss Bartlett had lost a Macintosh Square, Satan had lost the game. That last fact was undeniable. He climbed onto the box, shivering with his collar up, prophesizing the swift approach of bad weather. "Let us go immediately," he told them. "The Signorino will walk." "All the way? He will be ours," said Mr. B. Apparently, I told him it was unwise. He would look no one in the face. Perhaps defeat was particularly mortifying for him. He alone had played skillfully, using the whole of his instinct, while the other
Beyond there
had
is outside
grasped
mission area.
intelligence. He alone had divined what these were and what he wished them to be. He alone had interpreted the message that Lucy had received 5 days before from the lips of a dying man. Persephone, who spends half her life in the grave, she could interpret it also. Not so these English. They gained knowledge that slowly, perhaps late. The thoughts of a cab driver, however just, seldom affect the lives of his employers. He was the most competent of Miss Bartlett's opponents, but infinitely the least dangerous. Once back in the town, he and his insight and his knowledge would trouble English ladies no more. Of course, it was most unpleasant. She had seen his black head in the bushes. He might make a tavern story out of it. But after all, what have we to do with taverns? Real menace belongs to the drawing room. It was of drawing room people that Miss Bartlett thought as she journeyed downwards towards the fading sun. Lucy sat beside her. Mr. Eager sat opposite, trying to catch her eye. He was vaguely suspicious.
Detected.
They spoke of Alessio Baldovinetti. Rain and darkness came on together. The two ladies huddled together under an inadequate parasol. There was a lightning flash, and Miss Lavish, who was nervous, screamed from the carriage itself. At the next flash, Lucy screamed also. Mr. Eager addressed her professorial. Professional. Courage, Miss Honeychurch. Courage and faith. If I might say so, there was something almost blasphemous in the horror of the elements. Are we seriously to suppose that all these clouds, all this immense electrical display, is simply called into existence to extinguish you or me? No, of course. Even from the scientific standpoint, the chances against our being struck are enormous. The steel knives, the only articles which might attract the current, are in the other carriage, and in any case we are infinitely safer than if we were walking. Courage. Courage and faith. Under the rug, Lucy felt the kindly pressure of her cousin's hand. At times, our need for a sympathetic gesture is so great that we care not what exactly it signifies, or how much we may have to pay for it afterward. Miss Bartlett, by this timely exercise of her muscles, gained more than she would have got in hours of preaching or cross-examination. She renewed it when the two carriages stopped and passed into Florence. Cried Mr. Will you interpret for us? George! Cried Mr. Emerson.
Snake, are
Ask
you
your
okay?
driver which way
Snake!
George went. The boy may lose his head. He may be killed. Go, Mr. Eager, said Miss Bartlett. No, don't ask our driver. Our driver is
The
no
tank
help.
unit has already
Go
reached
and
the
support
fort.
poor Mr.
The mission will be a failure
He
at
is
this
nearly
rate
demented.
unless you act fast.
He may be killed,
Eliminate those
cried
tanks
the
at
old man.
Swassy Fort.
He may be killed. Typical behavior, said the chaplain as he quitted the carriage. In the presence of reality, that kind of person invariably breaks down. What does he know? Whispered Lucy as soon as they were alone. Charlotte, how much does Mr. Eager know? Nothing, dearest. He knows nothing. But, she pointed to the driver, he knows everything. Dearest, had we better? Shall I? She took out her purse. It is dreadful to be entangled with low-class people. He saw it all. Tapping Phaeton's back with her with her guidebook, she said, "Silenzio," and offered him a franc. "Va bene," he replied, and accepted it. As well this ending to his day as any. But Lucy, a mortal maid, was disappointed in him. Here was an explosion up the road. The storm had struck the overhead wire of the tram line, and one of the great supports had fallen. If they had not stopped, perhaps they might have been hurt. They chose to regard it as a miraculous preservation, and the floods of love and sincerity, which fructify every hour of life, were short and tumult. They descended from the carriage. They embraced each other. It was as though unworthiness as
Boss,
to forgive
that's a
them.
serious injury.
For a
It won't
moment,
heal on
they
its own.
realized
You'll need to
vast
treat it with first aid.
of good. The older people recovered quickly. In the very height of their emotion, they knew it to be unmanly or unladylike. Miss Lavish calculated that, even if they had continued, they would not have been caught in accident. The drivers, through miles of swollen roads, poured out their souls to the dryads and the saints, and Lucy
Snake,
poured
are you
out
okay?
hers to her cousin.
Snake!
Charlotte, dear Charlotte, kiss me again. Only you can understand me. You warned me to be careful, and
The tank unit has already reached the
thought I
fort.
was developing.
The mission will be a failure at this
Do not
rate
cry,
unless you
dear.
act fast.
Take your time.
Eliminate those tanks at
I
Swassy
have been
Fort.
obstinate and silly. Worse than you know. Far worse. Once by the river? Oh, but he wasn't killed. He wouldn't be killed, would he? The thought disturbed her repentance. As a matter of fact, the storm was worse along the road, but she had been near danger, and so she thought it must be near to everyone. I trust not. One would always pray against that. He is really... I think he was taken by surprise, just as I was before. But this time I'm not to blame. I want you to believe that. I simply slipped into those violets. No, I want to be really truthful. I am a little to blame. I had silly thoughts. The sky, you know, was gold, and the ground all blue, and for a moment, he looked like someone in a book. In a book? Heroes, gods, the nonsense of schoolgirls. And then, Charlotte, you know what happened then. Miss Bartlett was silent. Indeed, she had little more to learn. With a certain amount of insight, she drew her young cousin affectionately. All the way back, she thought she would take a break inside, with nothing to reflect.
Subject on board.
I want to be
Leave the rest to us.
she whispered. It is so hard. Don't be troubled. We will talk it over before bedtime in my room. So they re-entered the city with hands clasped. It was shocked the girl to find how far emotion had ebbed in others. The storm had ceased, and
Hey,
Mr.
quit
Emerson
kidding
was
around.
easier about his son.
Snake?
Mr. Beebe had regained good humor, and Mr. Eager was already snubbing Miss Lavish. Charlotte alone.
Tank unit has already reached the fort.
Charlotte,
The mission will be a failure at this rate unless you act fast. Eliminate those tanks
The
at Swazi
luxury of
Fort.
self-exposure kept her almost happy through the long evening. She thought not so much of what had happened as of how she should describe it. All her sensations, her spasms of courage, her moments of unreasonable joy, her mysterious discontent, should be carefully laid before her cousin, and together, with divine confidence, they would disentangle and interpret them all. At last, thought she, I shall understand myself. I shan't again be troubled by things that come out of nothing. I don't know what. Miss Allen asked her to play. She refused vehemently. Music seemed to her difficult and smile. She sat close to her cousin, who listened to a long story about lost luggage. When it was over, she tapped it on. Lucy became rather hysterical with the delay. In vain
Snake,
she
are
tried
you
to
okay?
check, or at all
Snake!
events to accelerate, the tale. It was not till a late hour that Miss Bartlett had recovered her luggage and could say in her usual tone of gentle reproach, "Well, dear, I at all events am ready for Bedfordshire. Come into my room, and I will give a good brush to your hair." With some solemnity, the door was shut, and a cane chair placed for the girl. Then Miss Bartlett said, "So, what is to be done?" She was unprepared for the question. It had not occurred to her that she would have to do anything. A detailed exhibition of her emotions was all that she had counted upon. "What is to be done? A point, dearest, which you alone can settle." The rain was streaming down the black windows, and the great room felt damp and chilly. One candle burnt trembling on the chest of drawers close to Miss Bartlett's toque, which cast monstrous and fantastic shadows on the bolted door. A tram roared by in the dark, and Lucy felt unaccountably sad, though she had long since dried her eyes. She lifted them to the ceiling, where the griffins and bassoons were colorless and vague, the very ghosts of joy. "It has been raining for nearly 4 hours," she said at last. Miss Bartlett ignored the remark. "How do you propose to silence him?" "The driver? No, my dear girl, no. Mr. George Emerson." Lucy began to pace up and down the room. "I don't understand," she said at last. She understood very well, but she no longer wished to be absolutely truthful. "How are you going to stop him talking about it?" "I have a feeling that talk is a thing he will never do." "I, too, intend to judge him charitably, but unfortunately I have met the type before. They seldom keep their exploits to themselves." "Exploits!" cried Lucy, wincing under the horrible plural. "My poor dear, did you suppose that this was his first? Come here and listen to me. I am only gathering it from his own remarks. Do you remember that day at lunch when he argued with Miss Allen that liking one person is an extra reason for liking another?" "Yes," said Lucy, whom at the time the argument had pleased. "Well, I am no prude. There is no need to call him a wicked young man, but obviously he is thoroughly unrefined. Let us put it down to his deplorable antecedents and education, if you wish, but we are no further on with our question. What do you propose to do? An idea rushed across Lucy's brain, which, had she thought of it sooner and made it part of her, might have proved victorious. I propose to speak to him, said she. Miss Bartlett uttered a cry of genuine alarm. You see, Charlotte, your kindness, I shall never forget it, but, as you said, it is my affair, mine and his. And you are going to implore him, to beg him to keep silence? Certainly not. There would be no difficulty. Whatever you ask him, he answers, yes or no. Hi friends, welcome back. I'm Christina, the manager at the Pacific Beach Library. Today is day 5 of our read-along together of A Room with a View, and it's going to be a wonderful week. And in fact, today is going to be a very exciting reading day. I've been looking forward to this chapter a lot. Let's start out with having some tea first. I hope. That was kind of a dramatic chiming noise. I did not do it on purpose. I'm always worried about breaking the glass. But let's see.
The tank unit has already reached the fort. The mission will be a failure at this rate unless you act fast. Eliminate those tanks at Smossy Fort.
And it is so good smelling. It really does smell like a chocolate cake.
Has been updated.
It's so good. This is the one. Let's see. The ingredients it lists are black tea, citrus peel, cherry, chocolate, and safflower. And I think that the chocolate is a chocolate mint. It smells so good. Really, really good. I've been meaning to bring in some cream to try with that one. I haven't done that yet, but I think that might make it even like more hot cocoa-y almost, but maybe not. But yeah, it's delightful as it is too. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about the readings that we did the other day on Thursday. Chapter 5 was called Possibilities of a Pleasant Outing. And it starts out with Charlotte Bartlett, of course. And basically Charlotte and Miss Lavish had a good adventure while Lucy had been out with Emerson. If you remember from last week's reading that we did on Wednesday, Lucy had been out on the plaza with George Emerson, or she had gone out with him, but she had seen an Italian man stabbed and killed and shocked, or fainted from the shock. And George Emerson had a rather intimate engagement for this time. For an unmarried lady to be, held in the arms.
Hey, quit kidding around.
So the next day,
Snake?
Charlotte and Lucy are together, and there's like an outing out there that includes the Emersons. And Lucy's like, "Nope, don't want to go with there. I'll stay with you, Charlotte." And so Charlotte ends up with Lucy, and they end up with Miss Lavish, Eleanor Lavish, the author, and Miss Lavish is saying, "I want to know more about what happened to you because I am writing a book and I think it sounds like it could be
The mission will be a failure at this rate unless you act fast.
She's writing
Eliminate those tanks at Smossy Fort.
a love story set in modern Italy that includes love, murder, abduction, revenge. It's going to Crete. It's going to include the fountain, and that kind of incident. So Lucy is reluctant to talk about it. Let's see. I got myself lost in here. I believe that this chapter I'm speaking about is Mr. Eager, who says that he is interested in putting them on the drive with Lucy, and Lucy in charge of that. And so he says that he wants to drive out to the country, it was lovely, he doesn't want to be with anyone, I like the country. And so he invites them to this drive. And he also, by the way, takes the time to make some snide remarks about Mr. Emerson. Mr. Eager, you might recall, was the gentleman who was in the tour in the Santa Croce the day that Lucy came in and tried to get the lumber and like the mural that had the fat man sort of inside. And so again, because he had Mr. Eager was upset with Mr. Emerson and rather appalled at his crassness. And
Boss, what happened?
And he tells Lucy that Mr. Emerson, he had known him back in England, and that he was in his London parish long ago, and in fact, he has not liked Mr. Emerson for quite some time, even before the incident at Santa Croce, and it was because he had he says that he considers Mr. Emerson to have been guilty of murdering his wife. To all intents and purposes, Mr. Emerson murdered her. And he's like, and didn't they say something about me that day? And Lucy's like, no, they said nothing against you, not a word. And Mr. Eager's like, oh, well, I thought they had been libeling me to you, but, you know, Mr. Eager is, again, unkindly disposed towards the Emersons, let's just say. He also becomes upset, by Lucy's defending the Emersons, and afterwards, Lucy and her chaperone, cousin Charlotte, are talking to each other, and she's like, "Oh, bother the drive. I'm not really interested in going." And Miss Bartlett's like, "No, of course we're going to go." Lucy and Charlotte have another interesting conversation at the end of the chapter where Charlotte basically says, if Florence born you, just say the word. If you know I would do anything for you, we could leave it a moment's notice and go somewhere else. And Lucy says, okay, I've got this letter saying that your five families are on the way to town. Why don't you go now? And Charlotte just says, no.
Shoot, man. I'm gonna die.
In the sight of God, they should enter no law. Lucy elegantly